Macmillan Digital Audio and Belinda present this unabridged recording of
The Terracotta Dog by Andrea Camilleri, translated by Stephen Sartorelli and read by Mark Meadows. Chapter 1. To judge from the entrance the dawn was making, it promised to be a very iffy day. That is, blasts of angry sunlight one minute, fits of freezing rain the next, all of it seasoned with sudden gusts of wind. One of those days when someone who is sensitive to abrupt shifts in weather and suffers them in his blood and brain is likely to change opinion and direction continuously, like those sheets of tin cut in the shape of banners and roosters that spin every which way on rooftops with each new puff of wind. Inspector Salvo Montalbano had always belonged to this unhappy category of humanity. It was something passed on to him by his mother, a sickly woman who used to shut herself up in her bedroom in the dark whenever she had a headache, and when this happened one could make no noise about the house and had to tread lightly. His father, on the other hand, on stormy seas and smooth, always maintained an even keel, always the same unchanging state of mind, rain or shine. This time, too, the inspector did not fail to live up to his inborn nature. No sooner had he stopped his car at the 10-kilometre marker along the Vigata-Fela highway, as he had been told to do, than he felt like putting it back in gear and returning to town, bagging the whole operation. He managed to control himself, brought the car closer to the edge of the road, opened the glove compartment, and reached for the pistol he normally did not carry on his person. His hand, however, remained poised in mid-air. Immobile, spellbound, he stared at the weapon. "Good God, it's real," he thought. The previous evening, a few hours before, Gege Gulotta called to set up the whole mess, Gege being a small-time dealer of soft drugs and the manager of an open-air bordello known as The Pasture. The inspector had been reading a detective novel by a writer from Barcelona who greatly intrigued him and had the same surname as he, though Hispanicized, Montalban. One sentence in particular had struck him. The pistol slept, looking like a cold lizard. He withdrew his hand with a slight feeling of disgust and closed the glove compartment, leaving the lizard to its slumber. After all, if the whole business that was about to unfold turned out to be a trap, an ambush, he could carry all the pistols he wanted, and still they would fill him with holes with their Kalashnikovs, however and whenever they so desired. Thank you and good night. He could only hope that Gege, remembering the years they'd spent together on the same bench in elementary school, and the friendship they'd carried over into adulthood, had not decided, out of self-interest, to sell him like pork at the market, feeding him any old bullshit just to lead him to the slaughter. No, not just any old bullshit. This business, if for real, could be really big, make a lot of noise. He sighed deeply and began to make his way slowly, step by step, up a narrow, rocky path between broad expanses of vineyard. The vines bore table grapes, with round, firm seeds, the kind called, who knows why, Italian grapes, the only kind that would take in this soil. As for trying to grow vines for making wine, you were better off sparing yourself the labour and expense. The 2-story cottage, one room on top of another, was at the summit of the hill, half hidden by 4 large Saracen olive trees that nearly surrounded it. It was just as Gege had described it. Faded, shuttered windows and door, a huge caper bush in front, with some smaller shrubs of touch-me-not, the small wild cucumber that squirts seeds into the air if you touch it with the tip of a stick, a collapsed wicker chair turned upside down, an old zinc bucket, eaten up by rust and now useless. Grass had overgrown everything else. It all conspired to give the impression that the place had been uninhabited for years, but this appearance was deceptive, and experience had made Montalbano too savvy to be fooled. In fact, he was convinced somebody was eyeing him from inside the cottage, trying to guess his intentions from the moves he would make. he stopped 3 steps away from the front of the house, took off his jacket, and hung it from the branch of the olive tree so they could see he wasn't armed. Then he called out, without raising his voice much, like a friend come to visit a friend, "Hey! Anybody home?" No answer. Not a sound. Montalbano pulled a lighter and a packet of cigarettes from his trouser pocket, put a cigarette in his mouth, and lit it, turning round halfway to shelter himself from the wind. That way, whoever was inside the house could examine him from behind, having already examined him from the front. He took 2 puffs, then went to the door and knocked with his fist, hard enough to hurt his knuckles on the crusts of paint on the wood. "Is there anyone here?" he asked again. He was ready for anything except the calm, ironic voice that surprised him from behind. "Sure there is. Over here." It had all started with a phone call. "Hello? Hello, Montalbano! Salvuzzo, it's me, Gege." "I know it's you. Calm down. How are you, my little honey-eyed orange blossom?" "I'm fine." "Working the mouth hard these days? Been perfecting your blowjob techniques?" "Come on, Salvu. Don't start with your usual faggot stuff. You know damn well that I don't work myself. I only make other mouths work for me." "But aren't you the instructor? Aren't you the one who teaches your multicoloured assortment of whores how to hold their lips and how hard to suck?" "Salvu, even if what you're saying was true, they'd be the ones teaching me. They come to me at age 10 already well trained, and at 15 they're top-of-the-line professionals. I've got a little Albanian 14-year-old. You're trying to sell me your merchandise now." "Listen, I got no time to fuck around. I have something I'm supposed to give you, a package." "At this hour? Can't you get it to me tomorrow morning?" "I won't be in town tomorrow." "Do you know what's in the package?" "Of course. Mostaccioli with mulled wine, the way you like 'em. My sister Marianina made them just for you." "How's Marianina doing with her eyes?" "Much better. They work miracles in Barcelona." "They also write good books in Barcelona." "What's that?" "Never mind. Just talking to myself. Where do you want to meet?" "The usual place. In an hour." The usual place was the little beach of Punta Secca, a short tongue of sand beneath a white marl hill, almost inaccessible by land, or rather accessible only to Montalbano and Gege, who, back in grade school, had discovered a trail that was difficult enough on foot and downright foolhardy to attempt by car. Punta Secca was only a few kilometres from Montalbano's little house by the sea just outside of Vigata, and that was why he took his time. But the moment he opened the door to go to his rendezvous, the telephone rang. "Hi, darling, it's me. Right on time. How did things go today?" "Business as usual. And you?" "Ditto. Listen, Salvo, I've been thinking long and hard about what—" "Livia, sorry to interrupt, but I haven't got much time. Actually, I don't have any time at all. You caught me just as I was going out of the door." "All right, then. Good night." Livia hung up, and Montalbano was left standing with the receiver in his hand. Then he remembered that the night before he had told her to call him at midnight on the dot, because they would certainly have as much time as they wanted to talk at that hour. He couldn't decide whether to call Livia back right then, or when he returned, after his meeting with Gege. With a pang of remorse, he put the receiver down and went out. When he arrived a few minutes late, Gege was already waiting for him, pacing back and forth the length of his car. They'd exchanged an embrace and kissed. It had been a while since they'd seen each other. "Let's go and sit in my car," said the inspector. "It's a little chilly tonight." "They put me up to this," Gege broke in as soon as he sat down. "Who did?" "Some people I can't say no to. You know, Salvu, like every businessman, I got to pay my dues so I can work in peace and keep the pasture, or they'd put me out to pasture in a hurry. Every month the good Lord sends our way, somebody comes by to collect." "For whom? Can you tell me?" "For Tano the Greek." Montalbano shuddered, but didn't let his friend notice. Gaetano the Greek, Benici, had never so much as seen Greece, not even through a telescope, and knew as much about things Hellenic as a cast-iron pipe. but he came by his nickname owing to a certain vice thought in the popular imagination to be greatly appreciated in the vicinity of the Acropolis. He had 3 certain murders under his belt, and in his circles held a position one step below the top bosses. But he was not known to operate in or around Vigata. It was the Cuffaro and Sinagra families who competed for that territory. Tano belonged to another parish. So, what's Tano the Greek's business in these parts? What kind of stupid question is that? What kind of fucking cop are you? Don't you know that for Tano the Greek there's no such thing as these parts and those parts when it comes to women? He was given control and a piece of every whore on the island. I didn't know. Go on. Around 8 o'clock this evening, the usual guy came by to collect. Today was the appointed day for paying dues. He took the money, but then, instead of leaving, he opens his car door and tells me to get in. So, what did you do? I got scared and broke out in a cold sweat. What could I do? I got in and we drove off. To make a long story short, he took the road for Fela and stopped after barely half an hour's drive. Did you ask him where you were going? Of course. And what did he say? Nothing. As if I hadn't spoken. After half an hour, he makes me get out in some deserted spot without a soul around and gestures to me to follow some dirt road. There wasn't even a dog around. At a certain point, and I have no idea where he popped out from, Tano the Greek suddenly appears in front of me. I nearly had a stroke. My knees turned to butter. Don't get me wrong, I'm no coward, but the guy's killed 5 people. 5? Why, how many do you think he's killed? 3. No way, it's 5, I guarantee it. Okay, go on. I got to thinking. Since I always pay on time, I figured Tano wanted to raise the price. Business is good, I got no complaints, and they know it. But I was wrong. It wasn't about money. What did he want? Without even saying hello, he asked me if I knew you. Montalbano thought he hadn't heard right. If you knew who? You, Salvu, you. And what did you tell him? Well, I was shitting my pants, so I said, yeah, I knew you, but just casually, by sight, you know, hello, how you doing? And he looked at me, you got to believe me, with a pair of eyes that looked like a statue's eyes. Motionless, dead. Then he leaned his head back and gave this little laugh and asked me if I wanted to know how many hairs I had on my arse, 'cause he could tell me within 2. What he meant was that he knew everything about me from the cradle to the grave, and I hope that won't be too soon. And so I just looked at the ground and didn't open my mouth. That's when he told me he wanted to see you. When and where? Tonight, at dawn. I'll tell you where in a second. Do you know what he wants from me? I don't know, and I don't want to know. He said to rest assured you could trust him like a brother. Like a brother. Those words, instead of reassuring Montalbano, sent a shiver down his spine. It was well known that foremost among Tano's 3 or 5 murder victims was his older brother Nicolino, whom he first strangled and then, in accordance with some mysterious semiological rule, meticulously flayed. The inspector started thinking dark thoughts, which became even darker, if that was possible, at the words that Gege, putting his hand on his shoulder, then whispered in his ear. Be careful, Salvu. The guy's an evil beast. He was driving slowly back home when the headlights of Jeje's car behind him started flashing repeatedly. He pulled over, and Jeje, pulling up, leaned all the way across the seat towards the window on the side closest to Montalbano and handed him a package. I forgot the mostaccioli. Thanks. I thought it was just an excuse. What do you think I am? Somebody who says something and means something else? He accelerated away, offended. The inspector spent the kind of night one tells the doctor about. His first thought was to phone the commissioner, wake him up and fill him in, to protect himself in the event the affair took any unexpected turns. But Tano the Greek had been explicit, according to Gege. Montalbano must not say anything to anyone and must come to the appointment alone. This was not, however, a game of cops and robbers. His duty was his duty. That is, he must inform his superiors and plan down to the smallest details how to surround and capture the criminal, perhaps with the help of considerable reinforcements. Tano had been a fugitive for nearly 10 years, and he, Montalbano, was supposed to go and visit him as if he were some pal just back from America. There was no getting around it. The commissioner must by all means be informed of the matter. He dialed the number of his superior's home in Montelusa, the provincial capital. "Is that you, love?" murmured the voice of Livia from Boccadasse, Genoa. Montalbano remained speechless for a moment. Apparently his instinct was leading him away from speaking to the commissioner, making him dial the wrong number. "Sorry about before. I just received an unexpected phone call and had to go out." "Never mind, Salvo. I know what your work is like. Actually, I'm sorry I got upset. I was just feeling disappointed." Montalbano looked at his watch. He had at least 3 hours before he was supposed to meet Tano. "If you want, we could talk now." "Now? Look, Salvo, it's not to get back at you, but I'd rather not. I took a sleeping pill and can barely keep my eyes open." All right. Till tomorrow, then. I love you, Livia." Livia's tone of voice suddenly changed, becoming more awake and agitated. "Huh? What's wrong? What's wrong, Salvo?" "Nothing's wrong. What could be wrong?" "Oh, no, you don't. You're hiding something. Are you about to do something dangerous? Don't make me worry, Salvo." "Where do you get such ideas? Tell me the truth, Salvo. I'm not doing anything dangerous. I don't believe you." "Why not, for Christ's sake?" "Because you said, 'I love you.' And since I've known you, you've said it only 3 times. I've counted them. And every time it was for something out of the ordinary." The only hope was to cut the conversation short. With Livia, one could easily end up talking till morning. "Ciao, my love. Sleep well. Don't be silly. I have to go out again." So how was he going to pass the time now? He took a shower, read a few pages of the book by Montalban, understood little, shuffled from one room to the other, straightening a picture, rereading a letter, a bill, a note, touching everything that came within his reach. He took another shower and shaved, managing to cut himself right on the chin. He turned on the television and immediately shut it off. It made him feel nauseated. Finally, it was time. As he was on his way out, he decided he needed a mostacciolo. With sincere astonishment, he saw that the box on the table had been opened, and not a single pastry was left in the cardboard tray. He had eaten them all, too nervous to notice. And, what was worse, he hadn't even enjoyed them. Chapter 2. Montalbano turned around slowly, as if to offset the dull, sudden anger he felt at having let himself be caught unawares from behind, like a beginner. For all that he had been on his guard, he hadn't heard the slightest sound. 1-0 in your favour, bastard, he thought. Though he'd never seen him in person, he recognized him at once. As compared with the mugshots from a few years back, Tano had grown his moustache and beard, but the eyes remained the same, expressionless, like a statue's, as Gege had accurately described them. Tano the Greek gave a short bow, and there wasn't the slightest hint of provocation or mockery in the gesture. Montalbano automatically returned the greeting. Tano threw his head back and laughed. "We're like 2 Japanese warriors. The kind with swords and breastplates. What do you call them?" "Samurai." Tano opened his arms as if wanting to embrace the man standing before him. "What a pleasure to meet the famous Inspector Montalbano. Personally, in person." Montalbano decided to dispense with the ceremonies and get straight to the point, just to put the encounter on the right footing. "I'm not sure how much pleasure you'll get from meeting me, sir." "Well, you've already given me one." "Explain." "You called me sir. That's no small thing. No cop, not a single one, and I've met a lot, has ever called me sir." You realize, I hope, that I'm a representative of the law, while you are a dangerous fugitive charged with several murders. And here we are, face to face. I'm unarmed. How about you? Me too. Tano threw his head back again and gave a full-throated laugh. I'm never wrong about people. Never. Unarmed or not, I have to arrest you just the same. And I am here, Inspector, to let you arrest me. That's why I wanted to see you. He was sincere, no doubt about it. But it was this very sincerity that put Montalbano on his guard, since he couldn't tell where Tano wanted to go with this. You could have come to police headquarters and turned yourself in. Here or in Vigata, it's the same thing. Ah, no, dear Inspector, it is not the same thing. You surprise me. You who know how to read and write. The words are not the same. I am letting myself be arrested. I'm not turning myself in. Go and get your jacket and we'll talk inside. I'll open the door in the meantime. Montalbano took his jacket from the olive tree, draped it over his arm, and entered the house behind Tano. It was completely dark inside. The Greek lit an oil lamp and gestured to the inspector to sit down in one of 2 chairs beside a small table. In the room there was a cot with only a bare mattress, no pillow or sheets, and a glass-fronted cupboard with bottles, glasses, biscuits, plates, packets of pasta, jars of tomato sauce, and assorted tin cans. There was also a wood-burning stove with pots and pans hanging over it. But the inspector's eyes came to rest on a far more dangerous animal than the lizard sleeping in the glove compartment of his car. This was a veritable poisonous snake, a machine gun sleeping on its feet, propped against the wall beside the cot. "I've got some good wine," said Tano, like a true host. "All right. Thanks," replied Montalbano. What with the cold, the night, the tension, and the 2+ pounds of mostaccioli he had wolfed down, he felt he could use some wine. The Greek poured, and then raised his glass. "To your health." The inspector raised his own and returned the toast. "To yours." The wine was something special. It went down beautifully, and on its way gave comfort and heat. "This is truly good," Montalbano complimented him. "Another glass?" To avoid the temptation, the inspector gruffly pushed the glass away. "Let's talk." "Let's. As I was saying, I decided to let myself be arrested." "Why?" Montalbano's question, fired point-blank, left the other momentarily confused. After a pause, Tano collected himself. "I need medical care. I'm sick." "May I say something? Since you think you know me well, you probably also know that I'm not someone you can fuck with." "I'm sure of it." "Then why not show me some respect and stop feeding me bullshit?" "You don't believe I'm sick?" "I do. But don't try to make me swallow this bullshit that you need to be arrested to get medical help. I'll explain if you like. You spent a month and a half at Our Lady of Lourdes clinic in Palermo, then 3 months at the Gethsemane clinic of Trapani, where Dr. Amerigo Guarnera even operated on you. And although things today are a little different from a few years ago, if you want, you can find plenty of hospitals willing to look the other way and say nothing to the police if you stay there. So it's not because you're sick that you want to be arrested." "What if I told you that times are changing and that the wheel is turning fast?" "That would be a little more convincing." "You see, when I was a little kid, my father, who was a man of honor when the word honor still meant something, my father, rest his soul, used to tell me that the cart that men of honor traveled on needed a lot of grease to make the wheels turn, to make them go fast. When my father's generation passed on and it was my turn to climb aboard the cart, some of our men said, 'Why should we keep on buying the grease we need from the politicians, mayors, bankers, and the rest of their kind, Let's make it ourselves. We'll make our own grease. Great! Bravo! Everyone agreed. Sure, there was still the guy who stole his friend's horse, the guy who blocked the road for some associate of his, the guy who would start shooting blindly at some other gang's cart, horse, and horseman. But these were all things we could settle among ourselves. The carts multiplied in number. There were more and more roads to travel. Then some genius had a big idea. He asked himself, "What's it mean that we're still travelling by cart? We're too slow," he explained. "We're getting screwed, left behind. Everyone else is travelling by car. You can't stop progress." Great. Bravo. And so everybody ran and traded in their cart for a car and got a driver's license. Some of them, though, didn't pass their driving school test and went out, or were pushed out. Then we didn't even have the time to get comfortable with our new cars before the younger guys, the ones who'd been riding in cars since they were born and who'd studied law or economics in the States or Germany, told us our cars were too slow. Now you were supposed to hop in a racing car, Ferrari, a Maserati, equipped with radiophone and fax, so you could take off like a flash of lightning. These kids are new, brand new. They talk to cell phones instead of people. They don't even know you, don't know who you used to be, and if they do, they don't give a fuck. Half the time they don't even know each other, they just talk over the computer. To cut it short, these kids don't ever look anyone in the eye. As soon as they see you in trouble with a slow car, they run you off the road without a second thought, and you end up in the ditch with a broken neck. And you don't know how to drive a Ferrari? Exactly. That's why, before I end up dead in a ditch, it's better for me to step aside. But you don't seem to me the type who steps aside of his own choosing. It's my own choosing, Inspector. All my own, I assure you. Of course, there are ways to make someone act freely of his own choosing. Once, a friend of mine, who was educated and read a lot, told me a story which I'm going to repeat to you exactly the way he told it. Something he read in a German book. A man says to his friend, "Want to bet my cat will eat hot mustard? The kind that's so hot it makes a hole in your stomach." "But cats don't like mustard," says his friend. "Well, I can make my cat eat it anyway," says the man. "Do you make him eat it with your fist or with a stick?" asks the friend. "No, sirree," says the man. "He eats it freely, of his own choosing." So they make the bet. The man takes a nice spoonful of mustard, the kind that makes your stomach burn just to look at it, picks up the cat, and wham, shoves it right up the animal's ass. Poor cat, feeling his asshole burn like that, he starts licking it. And so, licking it up little by little, he eats all the mustard of his own choosing. And that, my friend, says it all. I see what you mean. Now let's go back to where we started. I was saying I want to be arrested, but I'm going to need some theatricals to save face. I don't understand. Let me explain. He explained at great length, drinking a glass of wine from time to time. In the end, Montalbano was satisfied with Tano's reasons. But could he trust him? That was the question. In his youth, Montalbano had a great passion for card-playing, which he had luckily grown out of. For this reason, he now sensed that Tano was playing him straight, with unmarked cards. He had no choice but to put his faith in this intuition and hope he was not mistaken. And so they meticulously, painstakingly worked out the details of the arrest to ensure that nothing could go wrong. When they had finished talking, the sun was already high in the sky. Before leaving the house and letting the performance begin, the inspector gave Tano a long look, eye to eye. "Tell me the truth." "At your command, Inspector." "Why did you choose me?" "Because you, as you are showing me even now, are someone who understands things." As he raced headlong down the little path between the vineyards, Montalbano remembered that Agatino Cattarella would now be on duty at the station, and that therefore the phone conversation he was about to engage in promised at the very least to be problematic, if not the source of unfortunate and even dangerous misunderstandings. This Cattarella was frankly hopeless. Slow to think and slow to act, he had been hired by the police because he was a distant relative of the formerly all-powerful chamber deputy Cusumano, who, after spending a summer cooling off in Ucciardone prison, had managed to re-establish solid enough connections with the new people in power to win himself a large slice of the cake, the very same cake that from time to time was miraculously renewed by merely sticking in a few new candied fruits or putting new candles in the place of the ones already melted. With Cattarella, things would get most muddled whenever he got it in his head, which happened often, to speak in what he called Italian. One day he had shown up with a troubled look. "Chief, could you by any chance be able to give me the name of one of those doctors called specialists?" "Specialist in what, Cat?" "Gonorrhea." Montalbano had looked at him open-mouthed. "Gonorrhea? You? When did you get that?" "As I remember, I got it first when I was still a little thing, not yet 6 or 7 years old." "What the hell are you saying, Cat? Are you sure you mean gonorrhea?" "Absolutely. Had it all my life, on and off. It's here and gone, here and gone. Gonorrhea." In the car, on his way to a telephone booth that was supposed to be near the Torre Santa crossroads, supposed to be, that is, unless the receiver had been torn off, the entire telephone had been stolen, or the booth itself had disappeared, Montalbano decided not to call even his second-in-command, Mimi Augello, because he was the type, he couldn't help it, who before anything else would inform the newsmen and then pretend to be surprised when they showed up at the scene. That left only Fazio and Tortorella, the two sergeants, or whatever the hell they were called nowadays. He chose Fazio, since Tortorella had been shot in the belly not long before and hadn't yet fully recovered, feeling pain now and then in the wound. The booth was miraculously still there, the phone miraculously worked, and Fazio picked up before the second ring had finished. "Fazio? Are you already awake at this hour?" "Sure am, Chief. Less than a minute ago I got a call from Cattarella." "What did he want?" "He was speaking Italian, so I couldn't make much sense of it, but if I had to guess, I'd say that last night somebody cleaned out Carmelo Ingrazia's supermarket, the great big one just outside of town. They used a large truck or tractor-trailer at the very least." "Wasn't there a night watchman?" "There was, but nobody can find him." "Were you on your way there now?" "Yes." "Forget it. Phone Tortorella immediately and tell him to fill Augello in. Let those two take care of it. Tell them you can't go. Make up whatever bullshit you can think of. Say you fell out of bed and hit your head. No. Tell them the Carabinieri came and arrested you. Better yet, call them and tell them to notify the Carabinieri. It's small potatoes after all, just some shitty little robbery, and they're always happy when we bring them into our cases. Now listen, here's what I want you to do. Notify Tortorella, Augello, and the Carabinieri about the theft. Then round up Galluzzo, Jesus Christ, I feel like I'm running a chicken farm here, and Germanà, and bring them all where I tell you to go. And arm yourselves with submachine guns. Shit is right. This is a big deal, and we have to handle it carefully. No one is to whisper even half a word about this, especially Galluzzo with his newsman brother-in-law. And tell that chickenhead Gallo not to drive like he's at Monza. No sirens, no flashing lights. When you splash and muddy the waters, the fish escapes. Now pay attention, and I'll explain where you're to meet me." They arrived very quietly, not half an hour after the phone call, looking like a routine patrol. Getting out of the car, they went up to Montalbano, who signalled them to follow him. They met back up behind a half-ruined house, so they could not be seen from the main road. "There's a machine gun in the car for you," said Fazio. "Stick it up your arse. Now listen, if we play our cards right, We just might bring Tano the Greek home with us." Montalbano palpably felt that his men had ceased to breathe for a moment. "Tano the Greek is around here," Fazio wondered aloud, being the first to recover. "I got a good look at him, and it's him. He's grown a moustache and a beard, but you can still recognize him." "How did you find him?" "Never mind, Fazio, I'll explain everything later. Tano's in a little house at the top of that hill. You can't see it from here. There are olive trees all around it. It's a 2-room house, one room on top of the other. It's got a door and a window in front. There's another window to the top room, but that's in the back. Is that clear? Did you take all that in? Tano's only way out is through the front, unless he decides in desperation to throw himself out of the rear window, though he'd risk breaking his legs. So here's what we'll do. Fazio and Gallo go in the back. Me, Germana, and Galuzzo will break in the door and go inside." Fazio looked doubtful. "What's wrong? Don't you agree? Wouldn't it be better to surround the house and tell him to surrender? It's 5 against 1. He'd never get away. How do you know there's nobody inside the house with Tano?" Fazio shut up. "Listen to me," said Montalbano, concluding his brief war council. "It's better if we bring him an Easter egg with a surprise inside." Chapter 3. Montalbano calculated that Fazio and Gallo must have been in position behind the cottage for at least 5 minutes. As for him, sprawled belly down on the grass, pistol in hand, with a rock pushing irksomely straight into the pit of his stomach, he felt profoundly ridiculous, like a character in a gangster film, and therefore could not wait to give the signal to raise the curtain. He looked at Galuzzo, who was beside him, Germana was farther away to the right, and asked him in a whisper, "Are you ready?" "Yes, sir," answered the policeman, who was a visible bundle of nerves and sweating. Montalbano felt sorry for him, but couldn't very well come out and tell him that it was all a put-on. Of dubious outcome it was true, but still humbug. "Go!" he ordered him. As though launched by a tightly compressed spring and almost not touching the ground, in 3 bounds Galuzzo reached the house and flattened himself against the wall to the left of the door. He seemed to have done so without effort, though Montalbano could see his chest heaving up and down, breathless. Galuzzo got a firm grip on his submachine gun and gestured to the inspector that he was ready for Phase 2. Montalbano then looked over at Germana, who seemed not only serene, but actually relaxed. "I'm going now," he said to him without a sound, exaggeratedly moving his lips and forming the syllables. "I'll cover you," Germana answered back in the same manner, gesturing with his head towards the machine gun in his hands. Montalbano's first leap forward was one for the books, or at the very least a training manual. A decisive, balanced ascent from the ground, worthy of a high-jump specialist, a weightless aerial suspension, and a clean, dignified landing that would have amazed a ballerina. Galuzzo and Germana, who were watching him from different perspectives, took equal delight in their chief's bodily grace. The start of the second leap was even better calibrated than the first, but something happened in mid-air that caused Montalbano, from his upright posture, to tilt suddenly sideways like the Tower of Pisa, then plunge earthward in what looked truly like a clown's routine. After tottering with arms outstretched in search of a non-existent handle to grab onto, he crashed heavily to one side. Instinctively, Galuzzo made a move as if to help him, but stopped himself in time, plastering himself back against the wall. Germana also stood up a moment, but quickly got back down. A good thing this was all a sham, the inspector thought, otherwise Tano could have cut them down like 9-pins then and there. Muttering some of the pithiest curses in his vast repertoire, Montalbano began to crawl around in search of the pistol that had slipped from his hand during the fall. At last he spotted it under a touch-me-not bush, but as soon as he stuck his arm in there to retrieve it, all the little cucumbers burst and sprayed his face with seeds. With a certain melancholy rage, the inspector realized he'd been demoted from gangster film hero to a character in an Abbott and Costello movie. No longer in the mood to play the athlete or dancer, He covered the last few yards between him and the house with a few quick steps, merely hunching forward a little. Montalbano and Galluzzo looked one another in the eye without speaking and agreed on the plan. They positioned themselves 3 steps from the door, which did not look very resistant, took a deep breath, and flung themselves against it with their full weight. The door turned out to be made of tissue paper, or almost. A swat of the hand would have sufficed to push it open, and thus they both found themselves hurtling inside. The inspector managed by some miracle to come to a stop, whereas Galluzzo, carried forward by the violence of his thrust, flew all the way across the room and slammed his face against the wall, crushing his nose and ending up choking on the blood that started to gush violently forth. By the dim light of the oil lamp that Tano had left burning, the inspector was able to appreciate the Greek's consummate acting skills. Pretending to have been surprised awake, he leapt to his feet, cursing, and hurled himself towards the Kalashnikov, which was now leaning against the table and therefore far from the cot. Montalbano was ready to recite his lines as the foil, as they say in the theatre. "Stop, in the name of the law! Stop, or I'll shoot!" he shouted at the top of his lungs, then fired 4 shots into the ceiling. Tano froze, hands raised. Convinced that someone must be hiding upstairs, Galluzzo fired a burst from his machine gun at the wooden staircase. Outside, Fazio and Gallo, upon hearing all the shooting, opened fire on the little window to discourage anyone from trying that route. With everyone inside the cottage still deaf from the roar of the gunshots, Germanà burst in with the final flourish. "Don't anybody move, or I'll shoot!" He barely had time to finish uttering his threat when he was bumped from behind by Fazio and Gallo and pushed directly between Montalbano and Galluzzo, who, having set down his weapon, was dabbing his nose with a handkerchief he had taken out of his pocket, the blood having already dripped onto his shirt, tie, and jacket. At the sight of him, Gallo became agitated. "Did he shoot you? The bastard shot you, didn't he?" he yelled in rage, turning towards Tano, who was still standing as patient as a saint in the middle of the room, hands raised, waiting for the forces of order to put some order to the great confusion they were creating. "No, he didn't shoot me. I ran into the wall," Galluzzo managed to say with some difficulty. Tano avoided their eyes, looking down at his shoes. "He thinks it's funny," thought Montalbano. Then he brusquely ordered Galluzzo, "Handcuff him." "Is it him?" asked Fazio in a soft voice. "Sure it's him. Don't you recognize him?" said Montalbano. "What do we do now?" "Put him in the car and take him to police headquarters in Montelusa. On the way, ring up the commissioner and explain everything. Make sure nobody sees or recognizes the prisoner. The arrest, for the moment, has to remain top secret. Now go!" "What about you?" "I'm going to have a look around. Search the house. You never know." Fazio and the officers, holding the handcuffed Tano between them, started moving towards the door, with Germanà holding the prisoner's Kalashnikov in his hand. Only then did Tano the Greek raise his head and look momentarily at Montalbano. The inspector noticed that the statue-like gaze was gone. Now those eyes were animated, almost smiling. When the group of 5 had vanished from sight at the bottom of the path, Montalbano went back inside the cottage to begin his search. In fact, he opened the cupboard, grabbed a bottle of wine, which was still half full, and went and sat in the shade of an olive tree to drink it down in peace. The capture of a dangerous fugitive had been brought to a successful conclusion. As soon as he saw Montalbano come into the office, Mimì Augello, looking possessed by the devil, put him through the meat grinder. "Where the hell have you been? Where have you been hiding? What happened to everybody else? What the fuck is going on here anyway?" He must have been really angry to speak so frankly. In the 3 years they had been working together, the inspector had never heard his assistant use obscenities. Actually, no. The time some arsehole shot Tortorella in the stomach, Augello had reacted the same way. "Mimì, what's got into you?" "What's got into me? I got scared, that's what." "Scared? Of what? At least 6 people have phoned here. Their stories all differed as to the details, but they were all in agreement as to the substance. A gunfight with dead and wounded. One of them even called it a bloodbath. You weren't at home. Fazio and the others had gone out with the car without saying a word to anyone. So I just put 2 and 2 together. Was I wrong? No, you weren't wrong. But you shouldn't blame me. You should blame the telephone. It's the telephone's fault. What's the telephone got to do with it? It's got everything to do with it. Nowadays, you've got telephones even in the most godforsaken country haylofts. So what do people do when there's a phone within reach? They phone and they say things. True things, imagined things, possible things, impossible things, dreamed up things, like in that Eduardo de Filippo comedy, what's it called? Oh yes, The Voices Inside. They inflate things and deflate things, but never give you their name and surname. They dial emergency numbers where anyone can say the craziest bullshit in the world without ever assuming any responsibility for it. And meanwhile, the mafia experts get all excited because they think Omerta is on the decline in Sicily. No more complicity, no more fear. Ah, I'll tell you what's on the decline. My arse is on the decline, and meanwhile, the phone bill is on the rise. Montalbano, stop confusing me with your chatter. Were there any dead and wounded or not? Of course not. There was no gunfight. We just fired a few shots into the air. Galuzzo smashed his nose all by himself, and the guy surrendered. What guy? A fugitive. Yeah, but who? Cattarella arrived breathless and spared him the embarrassment of answering. Chief, that would be His Honour the Commissioner on the phone. I'll tell you later, said Montalbano, fleeing into his office. My dear friend, I want to give you my most heartfelt congratulations. Thank you. You really hit the bull's-eye this time. We got lucky. Apparently the man in question is even more important than he himself let on. Where is he now? On his way to Palermo. The Anti-Mafia Commission insisted. They wouldn't take no for an answer. Your men weren't even allowed to stop in Montelusa. They had to drive on. I sent along an escort car with 4 of my men to keep them company. So you didn't speak with Fazio? I didn't have the time or the chance. I know almost nothing about this case. So, actually, I'd appreciate it if you could pass by my office this afternoon and fill me in on the details. Aye, there's the hitch, thought Montalbano, remembering a 19th-century translation of Hamlet's monologue. But he merely asked, "At what time?" "Let's say around 5. Also, Palermo wants absolute secrecy about the operation, at least for now." "If it was only up to me, I wasn't referring to you, since I know you well, and can say that compared to you, even fish are a talkative species. Listen, by the way." There was a pause. The Commissioner had broken off, and Montalbano didn't feel like saying anything. A troubling alarm bell had gone off in his head at the sound of that laudatory, "I know you well." "Listen, Montalbano," the Commissioner hesitantly started over, and with that hesitation the alarm began to ring more loudly. "Yes, Commissioner?" "I'm afraid that this time there's no way I can prevent your promotion to Assistant Commissioner." "Madonnuzza bendita, why not?" "Don't be silly, Montalbano. Well, I'm sorry, but why should I be promoted?" "What a question! Because of what you did this morning." Montalbano felt simultaneously hot and cold. He had sweat on his forehead and chills down his spine. The prospect terrorized him. "I didn't do anything different from what my colleagues do every day, Commissioner. I don't doubt it. But this particular arrest, when it comes to be known, will cause quite a stir. So there's no hope. Come on, don't be childish." The inspector felt like a tuna caught in the net, the chamber of death. He began to feel short of breath, mouth opening and closing on emptiness. Then he tried a desperate suggestion. "Couldn't we blame Fazio?" "Blame? I'm sorry, I meant, couldn't we give him the credit?" "See you later, Montalbano." Augello, who was lurking behind the door, made a questioning face. "What did the commissioner say?" "We spoke about the situation." "Oh, right. You should see the look on your face." "What look?" "Like you've been to a funeral." "I had trouble digesting what I ate last night." "Anything interesting?" £3 of mostaccioli. Augello looked at him in dismay. Montalbano, sensing that he was about to ask him the name of the arrested fugitive, used the opportunity to change the subject and put him on another track. "Did you guys ever find the night watchman?" "The one in the supermarket?" "Yeah, I found him myself. The thieves bashed him in the head, then bound and gagged him and threw him in a great big freezer." "Is he dead?" "No, but I don't think he's feeling very alive either. When we pulled him out, he looked like a giant frozen stockfish." "Any idea which way they went?" "I've got half an idea myself, and the Carabinieri lieutenant has another. But one thing is certain. To haul all that stuff, they had to use a heavy truck. And there must have been a team of at least 6 people to load it, under the command of some professional. Listen, Mimi, I have to run home and change my clothes. I'll be right back." Near Marinella, he noticed that the reserve light for the gas tank was flashing. He stopped at the same filling station where there'd been a drive-by shooting a while back, when he'd had to bring in the attendant to get him to talk. Upon seeing the inspector, the attendant, who bore him no grudge, greeted him in his usual high-pitched voice, which made Montalbano shudder. After filling the tank, the attendant counted the money and eyed the inspector. "What's wrong? Didn't I give you enough?" "No, sir. There's enough money here, all right. I just wanted to tell you something." "Let's have it," Montalbano said impatiently. If the guy went on talking even a little, his nerves would give out. "Look at that truck over there." And he pointed at a large tractor-trailer parked in the lot behind the filling station, tarps pulled down tight to hide the cargo. "It was already here early this morning," he continued, "when I opened up. Now it's been 4 hours and still nobody's come to get it." "Did you look to see if anyone's sleeping in the cab?" "Yes, sir, I looked. There's nobody. And another weird thing, the keys are still in the ignition. The first soul to come along could start it up and drive it away." "Show me," said Montalbano, suddenly interested. Chapter 4. A tiny man with rat-tail moustaches, an unpleasant smile, gold-framed glasses, brown shoes, brown socks, brown suit, brown shirt, brown tie, a veritable nightmare in brown, Carmelo Ingrassia, owner of the supermarket, pressed the crease in his trousers with his fingers, right leg crossed over the left, and repeated his succinct interpretation of events for the 3rd time. "It was a joke, Inspector, a practical joke that somebody, I guess, wanted to play on me." Montalbano was lost in contemplation of the ballpoint pen he held in his hand. Concentrating his attention on the cap, he removed it, examined it inside and out, as though he had never seen so strange a gizmo, blew into it as if to cleanse it of some invisible speck of dust, looked at it again, remained unsatisfied, blew into it again, put it down on the desk, unscrewed the pen's metal tip, thought about this for a moment, set it down alongside the cap, carefully considered the piece remaining in his hand, lined this up near the other 2 pieces, and sighed deeply. This allowed him to calm down and check the impulse, which for a second had nearly overwhelmed him, to get up, go over to Ingrassia, punch him in the face, and ask, "Now tell me truthfully, in your opinion, am I joking or am I serious?" Tortorella, who was present for the interview and knew his chief's reactions well, visibly relaxed. "Let me try and understand," said Montalbano, in full control of himself. "What's to understand, Inspector? It's all clear as day. The stolen goods were all in the truck that you found. Not one toothpick was missing, not a single lollipop. So if they didn't do it to rob me, they must have done it as a joke, for fun." "You'll have to be patient with me, Mr. Ingrassia. I'm a little slow in the head. So, 8 days ago, from a depot in Catania, that is, on the other side of the island, 2 people steal a truck with a trailer belonging to the Sferrazza company. At that moment, the truck is empty. For 8 days, they keep this truck out of sight, hiding it somewhere between Catania and Vigata, since it wasn't seen in circulation. Logically speaking, therefore, the only reason that truck was stolen and hidden was to take it out of circulation when the time was right to play a joke on you. Let me continue. Last night the truck rematerializes, and around 1 a.m., when there's almost nobody on the streets, it stops in front of your supermarket. The night watchman thinks it's there to bring in new stocks, even at that odd hour. We don't know exactly how things went. The watchman still can't talk, but we do know that they put him out of commission, took his keys, and went inside. One of the thieves stripped the watchman and put on his uniform. This, I must say, was a brilliant move. The next brilliant move was that the others turned on the lights and got down to work in plain sight, taking no precautions. In broad daylight, one might say, if it wasn't night. Ingenious, no doubt about it. Because a stranger passing through the neighbourhood, noticing the watchman in uniform overseeing a few people loading a truck, would never dream that he was actually witnessing a robbery. This is the reconstruction of events offered by my colleague Augello. It was confirmed by the testimony of Cavaliere Misuraca, who was on his way home at the time. At the mention of that name, Ingrassia, who had seemed to be losing interest as the inspector went on, sat up in his chair as if stung by a wasp. "Misuraca?" "Yes, the one who used to work at the records office." "But he's a fascist." "I don't see what the Cavaliere's political beliefs have to do with the case we're discussing." "They have everything to do with it, because when I used to be involved in politics, he was my enemy." "You're no longer involved in politics?" "What's to be involved in any more? With that handful of Milanese judges who've decided to ruin politics, commerce and industry all at the same time." "Listen, the Cavaliere merely gave a testimonial establishing the modus operandi of the thieves." "I don't give a shit what the Cavaliere was establishing. He's an old geezer who can't even remember when he turned 80. He's so senile he's liable to see a cat and say it's an elephant. What was he doing out at that time of the night anyway?" "I don't know. I'll ask him. Shall we get back to the subject?" "Fine." Once it was loaded at your supermarket, after at least 2 hours of labour, the truck leaves. It drives 3 or 4 miles, turns around, parks in the lot behind the filling station, and remains there until I find it. And, in your opinion, someone went through this whole elaborate setup, committed 6 crimes, risking years in jail, just so he or you could have a good laugh? "Inspector, we could stay here all day arguing, but I swear to you that I can't imagine how it could have been anything but a joke." In the refrigerator, Montalbano found a plate of cold pasta with tomatoes, basil, and black passuluna olives that gave off an aroma to wake the dead, and a second course of fresh anchovies with onions and vinegar. Montalbano was in the habit of trusting entirely in the simple but zestful culinary imagination of Adelina, the housekeeper who came once a day to see to his needs, a mother of 2 irremediably delinquent sons, one of whom was still in jail, put there by Montalbano. And this day, too, she did not disappoint him. Every time he was about to open the oven or fridge, he still felt the same trepidation he used to feel as a little boy when, on the 2nd of November, he would look for the wicker basket in which the dead had left their gifts during the night. A celebration now lost, obliterated by the banality of presents under the Christmas tree, obliterated like the memory of the dead themselves. The only ones who did not forget their dead, and who indeed tenaciously kept their memory burning, were the mafiosi. But the presents they sent in remembrance were certainly not little tin trains or marzipan fruits. Surprise, in short, was an indispensable spice in Adelina's dishes. He took his 2 courses, a bottle of wine and some bread to the table, turned on the television and sat down to dinner. He loved to eat alone, relishing every bite in silence. This was yet another bond that tied him to Livia, who never opened her mouth when she ate. It occurred to him that in matters of taste he was closer to Maigret than to Pepe Carvalho, the protagonist of Montalban's novels, who stuffed himself with dishes that would have set a shark's belly on fire. On the national television stations, an ill wind of malaise was blowing. The governing majority found itself split over a law that would deny early prison release to those who had eaten up half the country. The magistrates, who had laid bare the dirty secrets of political corruption, were resigning in protest, and there was a faint breeze of revolt animating the interviews with people in the street. He switched to the first of the two local TV stations. Televigata was pro-government by congenital faith, whether the government was red, black, or sky blue. The news reporter made no mention of the capture of Tano the Greek, stating only that a few conscientious citizens had alerted the Vigata police of a lively but mysterious shootout at dawn in the rural area known as the Walnut, and that investigators, after arriving promptly at the scene, had found nothing unusual. The newscaster for the free channel, Niccolò Zitto, who did not hide his communist sympathies, likewise failed to mention Tano's arrest, which seemed to indicate that the news, fortunately, had not leaked out. But then, out of the blue, Zitto started talking about the bizarre robbery at the Ingrassia supermarket and the inexplicable rediscovery of the truck with all the stolen merchandise. The common opinion, reported Zitto, was that the vehicle must have been abandoned following an argument between the robbers over how to divide up the loot. Zitto, however, did not agree. In his opinion, things had gone differently. The real explanation was surely far more complicated. "And so I appeal directly to you, Inspector Montalbano. Is it not true that there must be more to this story than meets the eye?" the newsman asked, closing his report. Hearing himself personally addressed, and seeing Zitto's eyes looking out at him from the screen as he was eating, Montalbano let the wine he was drinking go down the wrong way and started coughing and cursing. After finishing his meal, he put on his bathing suit and dived into the sea. It was freezing cold, but the swim brought him back to life. "Now, tell me exactly how it all happened," said the commissioner. After admitting the inspector into his office, he had stood up and gone right over to him, embracing him warmly. One thing about Montalbano was that he was incapable of deceiving or stringing along people he knew were honest or who inspired his admiration. With crooks and people he didn't like, he could spin out the flim-flam with the straightest of faces and was capable of swearing he'd seen the moon trimmed in lace. The fact that he not only admired his superior, but had actually at times spoken to him as to a father, now put him, after the other's command, in a state of agitation. He blushed, began to sweat, kept squirming in his chair as if he were under cross-examination. The commissioner noticed his uneasiness, but attributed it to the discomfort that Montalbano genuinely felt whenever he had to talk about a particularly successful operation. The commissioner had not forgotten that at the last press conference, in front of the TV cameras, the inspector had expressed himself, if you could call it that, in long, painful stammerings, at times devoid of common meaning, eyes bulging, pupils dancing, as if he were drunk. "I'd like some advice before I begin." "At your service." "What should I write in the report?" "What kind of question is that?" "Have you never written a report before?" "In reports you write down what happened," the commissioner replied curtly, a bit astonished. And since Montalbano hadn't yet made up his mind to speak, he continued, "In other words, you say you were able to take advantage of a chance encounter and turn it into a successful police operation, skillfully, courageously, it's true, but look, I just wanted to say, let me finish. I can't help but notice that you took a big risk and exposed your men to grave danger. You should have asked for substantial reinforcements, taken due precaution. Luckily, it all went well, but it was a gamble. That's what I'm trying to tell you, in all sincerity. Now, let's hear your side." Montalbano studied the fingers on his left hand, as if they had just sprouted spontaneously, and he didn't know what they were for. "What's wrong?" the Commissioner asked. "What's wrong is that it's all untrue," Montalbano burst out. "There wasn't any chance encounter. I went to talk with Tano because he had asked to see me, and at that meeting we made an agreement." The Commissioner ran his hand over his eyes. "An agreement?" "Yes, on everything." And while he was at it, he told him the whole story, from Jeje's phone call to the farce of the arrest. "Is there anything else?" the Commissioner asked when it was over. "Yes. Things being what they are, in no way do I deserve to be promoted to Assistant Commissioner. If I were promoted, it would be for a lie, a deception." "Let me be the judge of that," the Commissioner said brusquely. He got up, put his hands behind his back, and stood there thinking a moment. Then he made up his mind and turned around. "Here's what we'll do. Write me 2 reports." "2?" said Montalbano, mindful of the effort it normally cost him to apply ink to paper. "Don't argue. The fake report I'll leave lying around for the inevitable mole who will make sure to leak it to the press or to the mafia. The real one I'll put in the safe." He smiled. "And as for this promotion business, which seems to be what terrifies you most, come to my house on Friday evening and we'll talk it over a little more calmly. My wife has invented a fabulous new sauce for sea bream." Cavaliere Gerlando Misuraca, who carried his 84 years belligerently, was, true to form, going immediately on the offensive as soon as the inspector said, "Hello?" "Who is that imbecile who transferred my call?" "Why, what did he do?" "He couldn't understand my surname. He couldn't get it into that thick head of his. Bisou Gaga, he called me." He paused warily, then changed his tone. "Can you assure me, on your word of honour, that he's just some poor bastard who doesn't know any better?" Realizing that it was Cattarella who had answered the phone, Montalbano could reply with conviction. "I can assure you. But why, may I ask, do you need my assurance?" "Because if he meant to make fun of me or what I represent, I'll be down there at the station in 5 minutes and will give him such a thrashing, by God, he won't be able to walk." And just what did Cavaliere Misuraca represent? Montalbano wondered, while the other continued to threaten to do terrible things. Nothing. Absolutely nothing from a, so to speak, official point of view. A municipal employee, long since retired, he did not hold, nor had he ever held any public office, being merely a card-carrying member of his party. A man of unassailable honesty, he lived a life of dignified quasi-poverty. Even in the days of Mussolini, he had refused to seek personal gain, having always been a faithful follower, as one used to say back then. In return, from 1935 onwards, he had fought in every war and been in the thick of the worst battles. He hadn't missed a single one, and indeed seemed to have a gift for being everywhere at once, from Guadalajara, Spain, to Bir el Gobi in North Africa by way of Axum, Ethiopia. Followed by imprisonment, his refusal to cooperate, and an even harsher imprisonment as a result, on nothing but bread and water. He therefore represented, Montalbano concluded, the historical memory of what were, of course, historic mistakes, but he had lived them with a naive faith, and paid for them with his own skin. Among several serious injuries, one had left him lame in his left leg. "Tell me," Montalbano had mischievously asked him one day, face to face, "if you'd been able, would you have gone to fight at Salo alongside the Germans and the Repubblichini?" In his way, the inspector was sort of fond of the old fascist. How could he not be? In that circus of corrupters and corrupted, extortionists and grafters, bribe-takers, liars, thieves and perjurers, turning up each day in new combinations, Montalbano had begun to feel a kind of affection for people he knew to be incurably honest. At this question, the old man had seemed to deflate from within, the wrinkles on his face multiplying as his eyes began to fog over. Montalbano then understood that Misurata had asked himself the same question 1,000 times and had never been able to come up with an answer. So he did not insist. "Hello? Are you still there?" Misurata's peevish voice asked. "At your service, Cavaliere." "I just remembered something, which is why I didn't mention it when I gave my testimony." "I have no reason to doubt you, Cavaliere. I'm all ears." "A strange thing happened to me when I was almost in front of the supermarket, but at the time I didn't pay it much mind. I was nervous and upset because these days there are certain bastards about who—" "Please come to the point, Cavaliere." If one let him speak, Misurata was capable of taking his story back to the foundation of the first fascist militias. "Actually, I can't tell you over the phone. I need to see you in person. It's something really big, if I saw right." The old man was considered someone who always told things straight, without overstating or understating the case. "Is it about the robbery at the supermarket?" "Of course." "Have you already discussed it with anybody?" "Nobody." "Don't forget, not a word to anyone." "Are you trying to insult me? Silent as the grave I am. I'll be at your office early tomorrow morning." "Just out of curiosity, Cavaliere, what were you doing, alone and upset, in your car at that hour of the night? You know, after a certain age, one must be careful." "I was on my way back from Montelusa, from a meeting of the local party leaders. I'm not one of them, of course, but I wanted to be present. Nobody shuts his door on Gerlando Misurata. Someone has to save our party's honour. They can't continue to govern alongside those bastard sons of bastard politicians and agree to an ordinance allowing all the sons of bitches who devoured our country out of jail. You must understand, Inspector—" "Did the meeting end late?" "It went on till 1 o'clock in the morning. I wanted to continue, but everyone else was against it. They were all falling asleep. They've got no balls, these people." "And how long did it take you to get back to Vigata?" "Half an hour. I drive slowly. But as I was saying—" "Excuse me, Cavaliere. I'm wanted on another line," Montalbano cut him off. "See you tomorrow."
This is the end of CD 1. The book continues on CD 2. CD 2.
Chapter 5. "Worse than criminals, worse than murderers. That's how those dirty sons of bitches treated us. Who do they think they are, the fuckers?" There was no calming down Fazio, who had just returned from Palermo. Germana, Gallo, and Galluzzo served as his psalmodizing chorus, wildly gesticulating to convey the exceptional nature of the event. "Total insanity! Total insanity!" "Simmer down, boys. Let's proceed in an orderly fashion," Montalbano ordered, imposing his authority. Then, noticing that Galluzzo's shirt and jacket no longer bore traces of the blood from his crushed nose, the inspector asked him, "Did you go home and change before coming here?" "Home? Home? Didn't you hear what Fazio said? We've just come from Palermo. We came straight back. When we got to the Anti-Mafia Commission and turned over Tano the Greek, they took us one by one and put us in separate rooms. Since my nose was still hurting, I wanted to put a wet handkerchief over it. I'd been sitting there for half an hour, and still nobody had shown up, so I opened the door and found an officer standing in front of me. 'Where are you going?' he says. 'I'm going to get a little water for my nose.' 'You can't leave,' he says. 'Go back inside.' Get that, Inspector? I was under guard, like I was Tano the Greek." "Don't mention that name and lower your voice," Montalbano scolded him. "Nobody's supposed to know that we caught him. The first one who talks gets his ass kicked all the way to Asinara." "We were all under guard," Fazio cut in, indignant. Galluzzo continued his story. "An hour later, some guy I know entered the room, a colleague of yours who was kicked upstairs to the Anti-Mafia Commission. I think his name is Sciacchitano." A perfect arsehole, the inspector thought, but said nothing. He looked at me as if I smelt bad or something, like some beggar. Then he kept on staring at me, and finally he said, "You know, you can't very well present yourself to the prefect looking like that." Still feeling hurt by the absurd treatment, he had trouble keeping his voice down. The amazing thing was that he had this pissed-off look in his eye, like it was all my fault. Then he left, muttering to himself. Later, a cop came in with a clean shirt and jacket. "Now let me talk," Fazio butted in, pulling rank. "To make a long story short, from 3 o'clock in the afternoon to midnight yesterday, every one of us was interrogated 8 times by 8 different people." What did they want to know? How the arrest came about? "Actually, I was interrogated 10 times, said Germana with a certain pride. "I guess I'd tell a good story, and for them it was like being at the movies." "Around 1 o'clock in the morning they gathered us together," Fazio continued, "and put us in a great big room, a kind of large office, with 2 sofas, 8 chairs and 4 tables. They unplugged the telephones and took them away. Then they sent in 4 stale sandwiches and 4 warm beers that tasted like piss. We got as comfortable as we could, and at 8 the next morning some guy came in and said we could go back to Vigata. No good morning, no goodbye, not even get out of here, like you say to get rid of the dog. Nothing." "All right," said Montalbano. "What can you do? Go on home now, rest up, and come back here in the late afternoon. I promise you I'll take this whole business up with the commissioner." "Hello? This is Inspector Salvo Montalbano from Vigata. I'd like to speak with Inspector Arturo Cecchitano." "Please hold." Montalbano grabbed a sheet of paper and a pen. He started doodling without paying attention, and only later noticed he had drawn a pair of buttocks on a toilet seat. "I'm sorry, the inspector's in a meeting." "Listen, please tell him I'm also in a meeting. That way we're even. He can interrupt his for 5 minutes, I'll do the same with mine, and we'll both be happy as babies." He appended a few turds to the shitting buttocks. "Montalbano, what is it? Sorry, but I haven't got much time." "Me neither. Listen, Shakitanov." "Eh? Shakitanov? What the hell are you saying? Isn't that your real name? You mean you don't belong to the KGB? I'm not in the mood for jokes, Montalbano." "Who's joking? I'm calling you from the commissioner's office, and he's very upset over the KGB-style treatment you gave my men. He promised me he'd write to the Interior Minister this very day." The phenomenon cannot be explained, and yet it happened. Montalbano actually saw Sciacchitano, universally known as a pusillanimous arselick, turn pale over the telephone line. His lie had the same effect on the man as a baton to the head. "What are you saying? You have to understand that I, as defender of public safety—" Montalbano interrupted him. "Safety doesn't preclude politeness," he said pithily, sounding like one of those road signs that say, "Be polite for safety's sake." "But I was extremely polite. I even gave them beer and sandwiches." "I'm sorry to say, despite the beer and sandwiches, there will be consequences higher up." "But cheer up, Sciacchitano, it's not your fault. You can't fit a square peg into a round hole." "What do you mean?" "I mean that you, being a born arsehole, will never be a decent, intelligent person. Now, I demand that you write a letter addressed to me praising my men to the skies, and I want it by tomorrow. Goodbye." "Do you think if I write the letter the commissioner will let it drop?" "To be perfectly honest, I don't know. But if I were you, I'd write that letter, and I might even date it yesterday. Got that?" He felt better now, having let off some steam. He called Cattarella. "Is Inspector Augello in his office?" "No, sir, but he just now phoned. He said that, figuring he was about 10 minutes away, he'd be here in about 10 minutes. Montalbano took advantage of the time to start writing the fake report. The real one he'd written at home the night before. At a certain point, Augello knocked and entered. "You were looking for me?" "Is it really so hard for you to come to work a little earlier?" "Sorry, but in fact I was busy till 5 o'clock in the morning. Then I went home and drifted off to sleep, and that was that." "Busy with one of those whores you like so much?" The kind that pack 250 pounds of flesh into a tight little dress? Didn't Cattarella tell you? He told me you'd be coming in late. Last night, around 2, there was a fatal car accident. I went to the scene myself, thinking I'd let you sleep, since the thing was of no importance to us. To the people who died, it was certainly important. There was only one victim. He took the downhill stretch of the Catena at high speed. Apparently his brakes weren't working, and ended up wedged under a truck that had started coming up the slope in the opposite direction. The poor guy died instantly. Did you know him? I sure did. So did you. Cavaliere Misuraca. Montalbano, I just got a call from Palermo. They want us to hold a press conference, and that's not all. They wanted to make some noise. That's very important. It's part of their strategy. Journalists from other cities will be there, and it will be reported on the national news. It's going to be a big deal. They want to show that the new government is not letting up in the fight against the mafia, and that on the contrary, they will be more resolute, more relentless than ever. Is something wrong, Montalbano? No, I was just imagining the next day's headlines. The press conference is scheduled for noon tomorrow. I just wanted to give you advance warning. Thank you, sir. But what have I got to do with any of it? Montalbano, I'm a nice man, a kind man, but only up to a point. You have everything to do with it. Stop being so childish. What am I supposed to say? Good God, Montalbano, say what you wrote in the report. Which one? I'm sorry, what did you say? Nothing. Just try to speak clearly, don't mumble, and keep your head up. And, oh yes, your hands. Decide once and for all where you're going to put them, and keep them there. Don't do like last time, where the correspondent of the Corriere offered aloud to cut them off for you, to make you feel more comfortable. And what if they question me? Of course they'll question you, to use your odd phrasing. They're journalists, aren't they? Good day. Too agitated by everything that was happening, and was going to happen the following day, Montalbano had to leave the office. He went out, stopped at the usual shop, bought a small bag of caglia e semenza, and headed towards the jetty. When he was at the foot of the lighthouse and about to turn back, he found himself face to face with Ernesto Bonfiglio, the owner of a travel agency and a very good friend of the recently deceased Cavaliere Misuraca. "Isn't there anything we can do?" Bonfiglio blurted out at him aggressively. Montalbano, who was trying to dislodge a small fragment of peanut stuck between 2 teeth, merely looked at him, befuddled. "I'm asking if there's anything we can do," Bonfiglio repeated resentfully, giving him a hostile look in return. "Do about what?" "About my poor dead friend." "Would you like some?" asked the inspector, holding out the bag. "Thanks," said the other, taking a handful of caglia e semenza. The pause allowed Montalbano to put the man he was speaking to in better perspective. Bonfiglio, aside from being like a brother to the late Cavaliere, was a man who held extreme right-wing ideas, and was not all there in the head. "You mean Misuraca?" "No, I mean my grandfather." "And what am I supposed to do?" "Arrest the murderers. It's your duty." "And who would these murderers be?" "Who they are, not would be. I'm referring to the local party leaders, who were unworthy to have him in their ranks. They killed him." "I beg your pardon, wasn't it an accident?" "Oh, I suppose you think accidents just happen accidentally." "I would say so." "You would be wrong. If someone's looking for an accident, there's always somebody else ready to send one his way. Let me cite an example to illustrate my point. This last February, Mimì Crapanzano drowned when he went for a swim. An accidental death, they said. But here I ask you, how old was Mimì when he died? 55 years old. Why, at that age, did he get this brilliant idea to go for a swim in the cold like he used to do when he was a kid? The answer is because less than 3 months before he had got married to a Milanese girl 24 years younger than him, and one day, when they were out strolling on the beach, she asked him, "Is it true, darling, that you used to swim in this sea in February?" "It sure is," replied Crapanzano. The girl, who apparently was already tired of the old man, sighed. "What's wrong?" Crapanzano asked, like an idiot. "I'm sorry I won't ever have a chance to see you do it again," said the slut. Without saying a word, Crapanzano took off his clothes and jumped into the water. Does that clarify my point? Perfectly. Now, to get back to the party leaders of Montelusa province. After a first meeting ended with harsh words, they held another last night. The Cavaliere, along with a few other people, wanted the chapter to issue a press release protesting against the government's ordinance granting amnesty to crooks. Others saw things differently. At a certain point, some guy called Misuraka a geezer. Another said he looked like something out of the puppet theatre. A third man called him a senile wreck. I learned all these things from a friend who was there. Finally, the secretary, some jerk who's not even Sicilian and goes by the name of Biraghin, asked him please to vacate the premises, since he had no authorization whatsoever to attend the meeting, which was true, but no one had ever dared say this before. So Gerlando got in his little Fiat and headed back home to Vigata. His blood was boiling, no doubt about it, but the others had made him lose his head on purpose. And you're going to tell me it was an accident? The only way to reason with Bonfiglio was to put oneself squarely on his level. The inspector knew this from experience. "Is there one television personality you find particularly obnoxious?" he asked him. "There are 100,000, but Mike Bongiorno is the worst. Whenever I see him, my stomach gets all queasy, and I feel like smashing the screen." "Good. And if, after watching this particular MC, you get in your car, drive into a wall, and kill yourself, what am I supposed to do, in your opinion?" "Arrest Mike Bongiorno," the other said firmly. He went back to the office, feeling calmer. His encounter with the logic of Ernesto Bonfiglio had distracted and amused him. "Any news?" he asked as he walked in. "There's a personal letter for you that came just now in the mail," said Cattarella, repeating for emphasis, "personal." On his desk he found a postcard from his father and some office memos. "Hey, Cat! Where'd you put the letter?" "I said it was personal," Cattarella said defensively. "What's that supposed to mean?" "It means that you have to receive it in person, it being personal and all." "Okay, the person is here in front of you. Where's the letter?" "It's gone where it was supposed to go, where the person personally lives. I told the postman to deliver it to your house, Chief, your personal residence in Marinella." Standing in front of the Trattoria San Calogero, catching a breath of air, was the cook and owner. "Where are you going, Inspector? Not coming in?" "I'm eating at home today." "Whatever you say. But I've got some rock lobster ready for the grill that'll seem like you're not eating them, but dreaming them." Montalbano went inside, won over by the image more than the desire. Then, after finishing his meal, he pushed the dishes away, crossed his arms on the table, and fell asleep. He always ate in a small room with 3 tables, and so it was easy for Serafino, the waiter, to steer customers towards the big dining room and leave the inspector in peace. Around 4 o'clock, with the restaurant already closed, the proprietor, noticing that Montalbano was showing no signs of life, made him a cup of coffee, then gently woke him up. Chapter 6. As for the personal letter earlier announced by Cattarella, he'd completely forgotten about it. It came back to him only when he stepped right on it upon entering his home. The postman had slipped it under the door. The address made it look like an anonymous letter. Montalbano, Police Headquarters, City. Then, on the upper left, the inscription, Personal, which had then set Cattarella's earthquake-damaged wits in motion. Anonymous it was not, however. On the contrary. The signature that Montalbano immediately looked for at the end went off in his brain like a gunshot. Esteemed Inspector, it occurred to me that in all probability I won't be able to come to see you tomorrow morning as planned. If the meeting of the party leadership of Montelusa, which I shall attend upon completing this letter, were by chance, as appears quite likely, to spell failure for my positions, I believe it would be my duty to go to Palermo to try and awaken the souls and consciences of those comrades who make the decisions within the party. I am even ready to fly to Rome to request an audience with the National Secretary. These intentions, if realized, would necessitate the postponement of our meeting, and thus I beg you please to excuse me for putting in writing what I ought properly to have told you in person. As you will surely recall, the day after the strange robbery/non-robbery at the supermarket, I came of my own accord to police headquarters to report what I had happened to see, that is, a group of men quietly at work, however odd the hour, with lights on, and under the supervision of a uniformed man who looked to me like the night watchman. No passer-by would have seen anything unusual in this scene. Had I noticed anything out of the ordinary, I would have made sure to alert the police myself. The night following my testimony, I was too upset from the arguments I'd had with my party colleagues to fall asleep, and thus I had occasion to review the scene of the robbery in my mind. Only then did I remember a detail that could prove to be very important. On my way back from Montelusa, agitated as I was, I took the wrong approach route for Vigata, one that has been recently made very complicated by a series of incomprehensible one-way streets. Instead of taking the Via Granette, I turned onto the old Via Lincoln, and found myself going against the flow of traffic. After realizing my mistake about 50 yards down the street, I decided to retrace my path in reverse, completing my maneuver at the corner of Vicolo Trupilla, thinking I would back into this street so that I could then point my car in the right direction. I was unable to do this, however, because the Vicolo was entirely blocked by a large car, a model heavily advertised these days but available only in very limited quantities, the Ulysses, license plate Montelusa 328280. At this point I had no choice but to proceed in my directional violation. A few yards down the street, I came out into the Piazza Chiesa Vecchia, where the supermarket is. To spare you further investigation, that car, the only one of its kind in town, belongs to Mr. Carmelo Ingrassia. Now, since Ingrassia lives in Montelucale, what was his car doing a short distance away from the supermarket, also belonging to Mr. Ingrassia, at the very moment when it was being burgled? I leave the answer to you. Yours, very sincerely, Cavaliere Gerlando Misuracca. "You've fucked me royally this time, Cavaliere," was Montalbano's only comment as he glared at the letter he had set down on the dining table. And dining, of course, was now out of the question. He opened the refrigerator only to pay glum homage to the culinary mastery of his housekeeper, a deserved homage, for an enveloping fragrance of poached baby octopus immediately assailed his senses. But he closed the fridge. He wasn't up to it. His stomach was tight as a fist. He undressed, and, fully naked, went for a walk along the beach. At that hour there was nobody around anyway. Couldn't eat, couldn't sleep. Around 4 o'clock in the morning, He dived into the icy water, swam a long time, then returned home. He noticed, laughing, that he had an erection. He started talking to it, trying to reason with it. "It's no use deluding yourself." The erection told him a phone call to Livia might be just the thing. To Livia, lying naked and warm, with sleep in her bed. "You're just a dickhead telling me dick-headed things, teenage jerk-off stuff." Offended, the erection withdrew. Montalbano put on a pair of briefs, threw a dry towel over his shoulder, grabbed a chair, and sat down on the veranda, which gave on to the beach. He remained there, watching the sea as it began to lighten slowly, then take on colour, streaked with yellow sunbeams. It promised to be a beautiful day, and the inspector felt reassured and ready to act. He'd had a few ideas after reading the Cavaliere's letter. The swim had helped him to organise them. "You can't show up at the press conference looking like that," pronounced Fazio, looking him over severely. "What, are you taking lessons from the Anti-Mafia Commission now?" Montalbano opened the padded nylon bag he was holding. "In here I've got trousers, jacket, shirt and tie. I'll change before I go to Montelusa. Actually, do me a favour. Take them out and put them on a chair, otherwise they'll get wrinkled." "They're already wrinkled, Chief." "But I wasn't talking about your clothes, I meant your face. Like it or not, you've got to go to the barber." Fazio had said, "like it or not," because he knew him well, and realised how much effort it cost the inspector to go to the barber. Running a hand behind his head, Montalbano agreed that his hair could use a little trim too. His face darkened. "Not one fucking thing's going to go right today," he predicted. Before exiting, he left orders that while he was out beautifying himself, someone should go and pick up Carmelo Ingrassia and bring him to headquarters. "If he asks why, what should I tell him?" "Don't tell him anything." "What if he insists?" "If he insists, tell him I want to know how long it's been since he last had an enema. Good enough? There's no need to get upset." The barber, his young helper, and a client who was sitting in one of the two rotating chairs that barely fitted into the shop, which was actually only a recess under a staircase, were in the midst of an animated discussion, but fell silent as soon as the inspector appeared. Montalbano had entered with what he himself called his barber-shop face, that is, mouth shrunken to a slit, eyes half closed in suspicion, eyebrows furrowed, expression at once scornful and severe. "Good morning. Is there a wait?" Even his voice came out deep and gravelly. "No, sir. Have a seat, Inspector." As Montalbano took his place in the vacant chair, the barber, in accelerated Chaplin-esque movements, held a mirror behind the client's head to let him admire the finished product, freed him of the towel round his neck, tossed it into a bin, took out a clean one, and put it over the inspector's shoulders. The client, denied even the customary brush-down by the assistant, literally fled from the shop after muttering, "Good day." The ritual of the haircut and shave, performed in absolute silence, was swift and funereal. A new client appeared, parting the beaded curtain, but he quickly sniffed the atmosphere and, recognizing the inspector, said, "I'll pass by later." Then he disappeared. On the street, as he headed back to his office, Montalbano noticed an indefinable yet disgusting odour wafting around him, something between turpentine and a certain kind of face powder prostitutes used to wear some 30 years back. The stink was coming from his own hair. "Ingrassia's in your office," Tortorella said in a low voice, sounding conspiratorial. "Where'd Fazio go?" "Home to change. The commissioner's office called. They said Fazio, Gallo, Galluzzo and Germanà should also take part in the press conference." "I guess my phone call to that arsehole Sciacchitano had an effect," thought Montalbano. Ingrassia, who this time was dressed entirely in pastel green, started to rise. "Don't get up," said the inspector, sitting down behind his desk. He distractedly ran a hand through his hair, and immediately the smell of turpentine and face powder grew stronger. Alarmed, he brought his fingers to his nose and sniffed them, confirming his suspicion. But there was nothing to be done. There was no shampoo in the office bathroom. Without warning, he resumed his barber-shop face. Seeing him suddenly transformed, Ingrassia became worried and started squirming in his chair. "Is something wrong?" he asked. "In what sense do you mean?" "Well, in every sense, I suppose," said Ingrassia, flustered. Montalbano shrugged evasively and went back to sniffing his fingers. The conversation stalled. "Have you heard about poor Cavaliere Misuraca?" the inspector asked, as if chatting among friends in his living room. "Ah, such is life," the other sighed sorrowfully. "Imagine that, Mr. Ingrassia. I'd asked him if he could give me some more details about what he'd seen the night of the robbery. We'd agreed to meet again. And now this." Ingrassia threw his hands up in the air, inviting Montalbano, with this gesture, to resign himself to fate. He allowed a respectful pause to elapse, then, "I'm sorry," he said, "but what other details could the poor Cavaliere have given you? He'd already told you everything he saw." Montalbano wagged his forefinger, signalling no. "You don't think he told you everything he saw?" asked Ingrassia, intrigued. Montalbano wagged his finger again. "Stew in your own juices, scumbag," he was thinking. The green Ingrassia started to tremble like a leafy branch in the breeze. "Well, then, what did you want him to tell you?" What he thought he didn't see. The breeze turned into a gale. The branch began to lurch. "I don't understand." "Let me explain. You're familiar, are you not, with a painting by Peter Bruegel called Children's Games?" "Who? Me? No," said Ingrassia, worried. "Doesn't matter. But you must be familiar with the works of Hieronymus Bosch." "No, sir," said Ingrassia, starting to sweat. Now he was really getting scared, his face starting to match the colour of his outfit. Green. "Never mind, then. Don't worry about it," Montalbano said magnanimously. "What I meant was that when someone sees a scene, he usually remembers the first general impression he has of it, right?" "Right," said Ingrassia, prepared for the worst. Then, little by little, a few other details may start coming back to him, things that registered in his memory but were discarded as unimportant. An open or closed window, for example, or a noise, a whistle, a song. What else? A chair out of place, a car where it's not supposed to be, a light, that sort of thing. You know, little details that can later turn out to be extremely important. Ingrassia took a white handkerchief with a green border out of his pocket and wiped the sweat from his face. "You had me brought here just to tell me that?" "No, that would be inconveniencing you for no reason. I would never do a thing like that. I was wondering if you'd heard from the people who, in your opinion, played that joke on you, you know, the phony robbery." "Not a word from anyone." "That's odd. Why?" "Because the best part of any practical joke is enjoying it afterwards with the person it was played on." "Well, if you do hear from anybody, please let me know. Good day." "Good day," muttered Ingrassia, standing up. He was dripping wet, his trousers sticking to his bottom. Fazio showed up, all decked out in a shiny new uniform. "I'm here," he said, "and the Pope is in Rome." "I know, Inspector, I know. Today is not your day." He started to leave, but stopped in the doorway. "Inspector Argello called. Said he had a terrible toothache. He says he's not coming unless he has to." "Listen, Do you have any idea where the wreck of Cavaliere Misuraka's Fiat ended up? It's still here, in our garage. If you ask me, it's just envy. What are you talking about? Inspector Augello's toothache. It's just a bout of envy. Who's he envious of? You! Because it's your press conference and not his. And he's probably also pissed off because you wouldn't tell him who you'd arrested. Would you do me a favour? All right, I'm going. When Fazio had closed the door, Montalbano dialed a number. The voice of the woman who answered sounded like a parody of an African in a dubbed film. Hello? Who there? Who you calling there? Where did the Cardamones find these housekeepers? Is Signora Ingrid there? Yeah, but who calling? This is Salvo Montalbano. You wait there. Ingrid's voice, on the other hand, was the very same as the voice the Italian dubber had given to Greta Garbo, who was herself Swedish. Ciao, Salvo. How are you? Long time no see. I need your help, Ingrid. Are you free tonight? Actually, no. But if it's really important, I can drop everything. It's important. Tell me where and when. 9 o'clock tonight, at the Marinella bar. For Montalbano, the press conference proved, as of course he knew it would, to be a long, painful embarrassment. Anti-Mafia Vice Commissioner de Dominicis came from Palermo and sat on the Montelusa Police Commissioner's right. Imperious gestures and angry glances prevailed upon Montalbano, who had wanted to remain in the audience to sit on his superior's left. Behind him, standing, were Fazio, Germanà, Gallo, and Galluzzo. The commissioner spoke first, and began by naming the man they had arrested, the number one of the number twos, Gaetano Benici, known as Tano the Greek, wanted for multiple murders and long a fugitive from justice. It was literally a bombshell. The journalists, who were there in great numbers, there were even 4 TV cameras, jumped out of their chairs and started talking to one another, making such a racket that the commissioner had difficulty re-establishing silence. He stated that credit for the arrest went to Inspector Montalbano, who, with the assistance of his men, and here he named and introduced them one by one, had been able to exploit a golden opportunity with skill and courage. Then De Dominicis spoke, explaining Tano the Greek's role within his criminal organization, certainly a prominent one, though not of the utmost prominence. As the anti-mafia vice commissioner sat back down, Montalbano realized he was being thrown to the dogs. The questions came in rapid-fire bursts, worse than a Kalashnikov. Had there been a gunfight? Was Tano alone? Were any law enforcement personnel injured? What did Tano say when they handcuffed him? Had he been sleeping or awake? Was there a woman with him? A dog? Was it true he took drugs? How many murders had he committed? How was he dressed? Was he naked? Was it true he rooted for the Milan soccer team? Did he have a photo of Ornella Muti on his person? Could the inspector explain a little better the golden opportunity the commissioner had alluded to? Montalbano struggled to answer the questions as best he could, seeming to understand less and less what he was saying. It's a good thing the TV's here, he thought. That way at least I can watch and make some sense of the bullshit I've been telling them. And, just to make things even harder, there were the adoring eyes of Corporal Anna Ferrara staring at him from the crowd. Niccolò Zitto, newsman from the Free Channel and a true friend, tried to rescue him from the quicksand in which he was drowning. "Inspector, with your permission," said Zitto, "you said you met Tano on your way back from Fiacca, where you'd been invited to eat a tabisca with friends. Is that correct?" "Yes." "What is a tabisca?" They'd eaten tabisca many times together. Zitto was simply tossing him a life-preserver. Montalbano seized it. Suddenly confident and precise, the inspector went into a detailed description of that extraordinary, multi-flavoured pizza. Chapter 7. Indy, alternately desperate, stammering, hesitant, bewildered, flabbergasted, lost, but always wild-eyed man framed pitilessly in the foreground by the Free Channel's video camera. Montalbano scarcely recognized himself under the storm of questions from vile snake-in-the-grass journalists. And the part where he'd explained how Tabisca was made, the part in which he came off best, had been cut out. Maybe it wasn't strictly in keeping with the principal subject, the capture of Tano the Greek. The aubergine parmesan his housekeeper had left for him in the oven suddenly tasted flavourless. But that was impossible. It couldn't be right. It must have been some sort of psychological effect from seeing himself look like such a stupid shit on television. All at once, he felt like crying, like throwing himself down on his bed and wrapping himself up in the sheet like a mummy. "Inspector Montalbano, this is Luciano Acquasanta from the newspaper Il Mezzogiorno. Would you be so kind as to grant me an interview?" "No." "I won't waste your time, I promise." "No." "Is this Inspector Montalbano? Spingardi, Attilio Spingardi from the RAI office in Palermo. We're putting together a round table to discuss—" "No." "At least let me finish." "No." "Darling, it's Livia. How are you feeling?" "Fine. Why?" "I just saw you on TV." "Oh, Christ. You mean they showed that all over Italy?" "I think so. But it was very brief, you know." "Could you hear what I was saying?" "No. One could only hear the commentators speaking. But I could clearly see your face, and that's what got me worried. You were yellow as a lemon." "It was even in colour." "Of course it was in colour. You kept putting your hand over your eyes and rubbing your forehead." "I had a headache, and the lights were bothering me." "Are you better now?" "Yes." "Inspector Montalbano, my name is Stefania Quattrini, from the magazine Essere Donna. We'd like to do a telephone interview with you. Could you remain on the line?" "No." "It'll only take a few seconds." "No."
"Do I have the honour of actually speaking with the famous Inspector Montalbano who holds press conferences?"
"Don't break my balls."
"No. Don't worry about your balls. We won't break them. It's your arse we're after."
"Who is this?"
"It's your death. That's who. You're not going to wiggle out of this one so easy, you lousy fucking actor. Who do you think you were, fooling with that little song and dance you put on with your pal Tano? You're going to pay for trying to fuck with us."
"Hello? Hello?" The line had gone dead, but Montalbano didn't have a chance to take in those threatening words and mull them over, because he realized that the insistent noise he'd been hearing for some time amid the flurry of phone calls was the doorbell ringing. For some reason he was convinced it must be a journalist more clever than the rest who decided to show up at his house. Exasperated, he ran to the entrance and, without opening, yelled, "Who the hell is it?" "It's the Commissioner." What could he want from him at home at that hour without even having called to alert him? He released the bolt with a swat of the hand and yanked the door wide open. "Hello. Come on in. Make yourself comfortable," he said, standing aside to let him in. "We haven't got any time. Get yourself in order. I'll wait for you in the car." He turned around and walked away. Passing in front of the large mirror on the armoire, Montalbano realized what the Commissioner had meant by "get yourself in order." He was completely naked. The car had none of the usual police markings. It looked rather like a rental car. At the wheel, in civilian clothing, was an officer from the Montelusa station whom he knew. As soon as he sat down, the Commissioner began to speak. "I apologize for not calling beforehand, but your phone was always busy." "I know." The Commissioner could have cut into the line, of course, but that wasn't in keeping with his polite, gentlemanly way of doing things. Montalbano didn't explain why the telephone had given him no peace. It didn't matter. His boss was gloomier than he'd ever seen him before. face drawn, mouth half twisted in a kind of grimace. After they'd been driving on the highway to Palermo for some 45 minutes, with the driver going full tilt, Montalbano started looking out on that part of his island's landscape which charmed him most. "You like it? Really?" an astonished Livia had asked him once, a few years earlier, when he brought her to this area. Arid hills like giant tumuli, covered only by a yellow stubble of dry grass, and abandoned by the hand of man after sudden failures owing to drought, extreme heat, or more simply to the weariness of a battle lost from the outset, were interrupted here and there by a group of rocky peaks rising absurdly out of nothing, or perhaps fallen from above, stalactites or stalagmites of the deep, open-air cave that is Sicily. The few houses one saw, all single-story, domed structures, cubes of dry stone, stood askew as if by chance alone they'd survived the violent bucking of an earth that didn't want them on its back. Still there was the rare spot of green, not of trees or cultivation, but of agaves, swordgrass, buckthorn and sorghum, beleaguered and dusty, they too on the verge of surrender. As if he had been waiting for the appropriate scenery, the commissioner finally began to speak, though Montalbano realized the words were addressed not to him, but to the commissioner himself, in a kind of painful, furious monologue. Why did they do it? Who decided to decide? If an investigation were held, an impossible conjecture, it would turn out that either nobody took the first step, or they were acting on orders from above. So, let's see who these superiors who gave the orders are. The head of the Anti-Mafia Commission would deny all knowledge, as would the Minister of the Interior and the Prime Minister, the head of state, which leaves the Pope, Jesus Christ, the Virgin Mary, and God the Father in that order. All would cry in outrage, how could anyone think it was they who gave the order? That leaves only the devil, notorious for being the cause of all evil. He's the guilty one. Satan. Anyway, to make a long story short, they decided to transfer him to another prison. Tano? Montalbano ventured to ask. The commissioner didn't even answer. Why? We'll never know. That much is certain. And while we were holding our press conference, they were putting him in an ordinary car with 2 plainclothes men as escort. Ah, how clever! So as not to attract attention, of course. And so, when the requisite high-powered motorcycle appeared from an alley with 2 men aboard, rendered utterly unrecognizable by their helmets. Final tally, 2 policemen dead. Tano in the hospital, on death's doorstep. And there you have it. Montalbano absorbed it all, thinking cynically that if only they'd killed Tano a few hours earlier, he would have been spared the torture of the press conference. He started asking questions only because he sensed that the commissioner had calmed down a little after his outburst. But how did they know? The commissioner slammed the seat in front of him, making the driver start and the car veer slightly. What do you think, Montalbano? A mole, no? That's what's driving me so crazy. The inspector let a minute or two pass before asking another question. Where do we come in? He wants to talk to you. He knows he's dying, and he wants to tell you something. I see. So, why did you go to all this trouble? I could have gone by myself. I came along to prevent any snags or delays. In their sublime intelligence, these guys are capable of denying you access to him. In front of the hospital gate, there was an armoured car, as well as some 10 guards scattered about the yard, submachine guns in hand. Idiots, said the commissioner. They passed through at least 5 checkpoints, growing more irritated each time, then finally reached the ward where Tano's room was. All the other patients had been cleared out, transferred elsewhere, amid curses and obscenities. At each end of the corridor were 4 armed policemen, plus 2 outside the door of the room Tano was obviously in. The Commissioner showed them his pass. "Congratulations," he said to the corporal. "For what, Mr. Commissioner?" "For maintaining order." "Thank you," said the corporal, brightening, the Commissioner's irony sailing far over his head. "You go in alone," the Commissioner said to Montalbano. "I'll wait outside." Only then did he notice how ashen the inspector was, his forehead bathed in sweat. "My God, Montalbano, what's wrong? Do you feel ill?" "I'm perfectly fine," the inspector replied through clenched teeth. He was lying. In fact, he felt terrible. The dead left him utterly indifferent. He could sleep with them, pretend to break bread with them, play hearts or spades with them. They didn't bother him in the least. The dying, on the other hand, made him break into a sweat. His hands would start to tremble. He would go cold all over. A hole would open up in his stomach. Under the sheet that covered him, Tano's body looked shrunken, smaller than the inspector remembered it. His arms lay stretched along his sides, the right arm wrapped in thick bandages. Oxygen tubes sprouted from his nose, which had turned almost transparent, and his face looked unreal, as if it belonged to a wax doll. Overcoming the desire to run away, Montalbano pulled up a metal chair and sat down beside the dying man, who kept his eyes shut, as if asleep. "Tano? Tano? It's Inspector Montalbano." The other reacted immediately, opening his eyes and making as if to sit up in bed, a violent start surely triggered by the animal instinct of one who has long been hunted. Then his eyes brought the inspector into focus, and the tension in his body visibly relaxed. "You wanted to talk to me?" Tano nodded yes, and gave a hint of a smile. He spoke very slowly, with great effort.
"They ran me off the road, anyway."
He was referring to the discussion they'd had in the cottage. Montalbano didn't know what to say.
"Come closer,"
the old man said. Montalbano rose from his chair and leaned over.
"Closer."
The inspector bent down so far forward his ear actually touched Tano's lip. The man's burning breath made him feel disgusted. Tano then told him what he had to tell, lucidly and precisely. But the talking had worn him out, and he closed his eyes again. Montalbano didn't know what to do, whether to leave or stay a little while longer. He decided to sit down, and Tano said something again in a gurgly voice. The inspector stood back and leaned over the dying man. "What did you say?"
"I'm spooked."
Tano was afraid, and in his present state he didn't hesitate to admit it. Was it pity, this sudden wave of heat, this flutter of the heart, this agonizing surge of emotion? He put a hand on Tano's forehead, and the intimate words came out spontaneously. "You needn't be ashamed to say so. It's one more thing that makes you a man. We'll all be scared when our time comes. Goodbye, Tano." He walked out quickly, closing the door behind him. In the hallway, together with the commissioner and policeman, were De Dominicis and Sciacchitano. He ran up to them. "What did he say?" De Dominicis asked anxiously. "Nothing. He didn't manage to say anything. He wanted to, but couldn't. He's dying." "Ha!" said Sciacchitano, doubtful. Very calmly, Montalbano placed his open hand on Sciacchitano's chest and gave him a violent push. The man reeled 3 steps backward, stunned. "Stay right where you are and don't come any closer," the inspector said through clenched teeth. "That's enough, Montalbano," the commissioner intervened. De Dominicis seemed to pay no mind to the two men's differences. "Who knows what he wanted to tell you?" he persisted, eyeing Montalbano inquisitively, as if to say, "You're not talking straight." "If you'd like, I can try and guess," Montalbano retorted insolently. Before leaving the hospital, Montalbano knocked back a double J&B neat at the bar. Then they headed back to Montelusa. He figured he'd be back in Vigata by 7:30 and therefore could keep his appointment with Ingrid. "He talked, didn't he?" "Yes." "Anything important?" "Yes, in my opinion." "Why did he choose you?" "He said he wanted to give me a present for playing fair with him throughout this whole business." "I'm listening." Montalbano told him everything, and when he had finished, the commissioner looked pensive. Then he sighed. "You work it all out yourself, with your men. It's better if this remains a secret. Nobody else should know about it, not even in my office. As you've just seen, there are moles everywhere." He visibly sank back into the bad mood he'd been in during the drive to the hospital. "So it's come to this," he said angrily. Halfway home, the cell phone rang. "Yes," answered the commissioner. Somebody spoke briefly at the other end. "Thank you," said the commissioner. He turned to Montalbano. "That was De Dominicis. He kindly informed me that Tano died virtually as we were leaving the hospital." "They'd better be careful," said Montalbano. "Careful?" "Not to let anyone steal the body," the inspector said with bitter irony. They rode another while in silence. "Why did De Dominicis bother to inform you that Tano was dead?" "That call, for all practical purposes, was meant for you, my friend. Obviously, De Dominicis, who is no fool, correctly believes that Tano managed to tell you something, and he would like a share of the pie, if not the whole thing." Back at headquarters, he found only Cattarella and Fazio. It was better this way. He preferred talking to Fazio with nobody around. Out of a sense of duty more than curiosity, he asked, "Where are the others?" "They went chasing after 4 kids who were racing each other on 2 motorbikes. Jesus! The whole squad is gone chasing after a pair of racing motorbikes. It's a special kind of race," Fazio explained. "One motorbike is green, the other yellow. The yellow one starts out first and races the whole length of a street, snatching whatever's there to be snatched. An hour or two later, after the people have calmed down, the green one takes off and swipes whatever's still there to be swiped. Then they change street and neighbourhood, but this time the green one goes first. It's a race to see who can steal the most." "I see. Listen, Fazio, this evening I want you to drop by the Vinti warehouse and ask the manager in my name to lend us some shovels, pickaxes, mattocks and spades, 10 or so. We'll all meet here tomorrow morning at 6. Inspector Augello and Cattarella will stay behind at headquarters. I want 2 cars. No, make that 1 car, because you're going to ask Vinti's to give you a jeep, too. By the way, who has the key to our garage?" "Whoever's on duty always has it. At the moment, that would be Cattarella." "Get it from him and give it to me." "Right away. But if you don't mind my asking, what do we need shovels and pickaxes for?" "We're changing profession. As of tomorrow, we're going into farming. The healthy life. Working in the fields. What do you say? You know, Inspector, for the last few days, there's just no reasoning with you. Maybe you could tell us what's got into you. You're always obnoxious and rude." Chapter 8. He first met Ingrid in the course of an investigation in which, through a series of false leads, she'd been offered up to him, though completely innocent, as the scapegoat. Since then, a strange sort of friendship had developed between the inspector and that splendid woman. From time to time, Ingrid would call him up, and they would spend the evening chatting. The young woman would talk about her problems, confiding in Montalbano, and he would dispense wise, brotherly advice. He was a kind of spiritual father, a role he had had to impose on himself by force, since Ingrid didn't exactly arouse spiritual feelings, and his recommendations were always studiously ignored. At none of their meetings, there'd been 6 or 7, had Montalbano ever shown up before she did. Ingrid had a mania for punctuality. This time, too, after parking in the Marinella bar's car park, he noticed her car was already there, beside a Porsche convertible that looked like a rocket and was painted a tasteless shade of yellow that offended the eyes. When he entered the bar, Ingrid was standing at the counter drinking a whiskey. Beside her was a man aged 40-ish, dressed in a fancy canary yellow suit, sporting a Rolex and ponytail, and talking to her confidentially. When he has to change clothes, thought the inspector, does he also change cars? As soon as she saw him, Ingrid came running and embraced him, kissing him lightly on the lips. She was obviously happy to see him. Montalbano, too, was pleased. Ingrid looked like a gift from God, with her jeans painted on her very long legs, her sandals, her light blue see-through blouse affording a glimpse of her round breasts, her blonde hair hanging loose around her shoulders. "Sorry," he said to the canary who was with her. "See you around." They went and sat down at a table. Montalbano didn't feel like drinking anything. The man with the Rolex and ponytail took his whiskey out to the seaside terrace. Ingrid and the inspector smiled at each other. "You're looking well," she said. "A lot better than you did on TV today." "Yeah," said Montalbano, then changed the subject. "You look like you're doing all right yourself." "Did you want to see me to exchange compliments?" "I wanted to ask a favour of you." "Here I am." The man with the ponytail was eyeing them from the terrace. "Who's that?" "Somebody I know. I passed him on my way here. He followed and offered me a drink." "In what sense do you know him?" Ingrid turned serious, a line creasing her forehead. "Are you jealous?" "No, you know better than that. Anyway, there'd be no reason with him. It's just that he got on my nerves from the minute I saw him. What's his name?" "Come on, Salvo. What do you care?" "Tell me his name." "Beppe. Beppe Di Vito." "And what does he do to earn his Rolex, Porsche, and everything else?" "Trades in leather goods." "Ever slept with him?" "Yes, about a year ago. Only once. And he was just suggesting we do it again, but I don't have a very pleasant memory of it." "Some kind of degenerate?" Ingrid eyed him for a moment, then let out a laugh that made the bartender jump. "What's so funny?" "The face you just made. The good cop, full of indignation. No, Salvo. He's just the opposite. Totally lacking in imagination. All I can remember is that it seemed suffocating and pointless." Montalbano gestured for the man with the ponytail to come over to their table, and, as he approached, smiling, Ingrid gave the inspector a worried look. "Hello. Don't I know you? You're Inspector Montalbano, aren't you?" "Unfortunately for you, you're going to get to know me even better." The other became flustered, his whiskey trembling in his glass, ice cubes tinkling. "Why, unfortunately?" "Your name is Giuseppe De Vito, and you deal in leather goods, am I correct?" "Yes, but I don't understand." "You'll understand in due time. One of these days, you're going to be called into Montelusa Police Headquarters. I'll be there too. I think we'll have a lot to talk about." The man with the ponytail, face suddenly pale, set his glass down on the table, unable to hold it any longer. "Couldn't you at least give me a hint? Some explanation?" Montalbano assumed the expression of someone just overcome by an irresistible wave of generosity. "All right, but only because you're a friend of the lady. Do you know a German man by the name of Kurt Zuckert?" "Never heard of him, I swear," the man said, digging a canary-coloured handkerchief out of his pocket and mopping his brow with it. "Well, if that's your answer, I have nothing more to say to you," the inspector said icily. He looked him up and down, then gestured for him to come closer. "I'll give you my advice. Don't try to be too clever. Goodbye." "Goodbye," De Vito replied mechanically, and without even looking back at Ingrid, he raced out of the bar. "You're a shit," Ingrid said calmly, "and an asshole." "Yes, you're right. Every now and then something comes over me and I get that way." "Does this Zuckert really exist?" "He used to, but he called himself Curzio Malaparte. He was a writer. They heard the roar of the Porsche burning rubber as it pulled out." "So, did you get it out of your system?" Ingrid asked. "I think so." "I could tell right away, you know, that you were in a bad mood. What is it? Can you tell me?" "I could, but it's not worth going into. Problems at work." Montalbano suggested that Ingrid leave her car in the bar's car park. They would come back later to get it. Ingrid didn't ask him where they were going, nor what they were going to do. All of a sudden, Montalbano asked her, "How's it going with your father-in-law?" "Fine," Ingrid said cheerfully. "I'm sorry, I should have mentioned it sooner. Things are fine with my father-in-law. He's left me in peace for 2 months now. He's no longer after me." "What happened?" "I don't know. He hasn't told me anything. The last time was on our way back from Fela, where we'd been to a wedding. My husband couldn't make it, and my mother-in-law wasn't feeling well, so the two of us were left alone again. At some point he turned off onto a side road, continued for a mile or two, then stopped in a wooded area. He made me get out of the car, tore off my clothes, threw me to the ground, and fucked me with his usual brutality. The next day I left for Palermo with my husband, and when I got back a week later, my father-in-law seemed like he'd aged. He was trembling. Since then, he's sort of been avoiding me. Now, when I find myself face to face with him in some corridor of the house, I'm no longer afraid he's going to push me up against the wall with one hand on my tits and the other on my cunt." "It's better this way, isn't it?" The story Ingrid had just told him, Montalbano knew better than she did. The inspector had learned of Ingrid's relations with her father-in-law the very first time he met her. Then, one night, as they were talking, without warning, Ingrid had burst into convulsive sobs. She could no longer bear the situation with her husband's father. An absolutely liberated woman, she felt soiled, demeaned by this quasi-incestuous relationship that was being forced on her. She thought of leaving her husband and returning to Sweden. Being an excellent mechanic, she would manage to earn a living. That was when Montalbano had made up his mind to help her get out of that mess. The following day, he'd invited Corporal Anna Ferrara to his house for dinner. Young Anna was in love with him and convinced that he and Ingrid were lovers. "I'm desperate," he had told her, opening the evening with a face worthy of a great tragic actor. "Oh my God, what's wrong?" asked Anna, squeezing one of his hands in hers. "Ingrid is cheating on me." He let his head fall to her breast and, by some miracle, managed to make his eyes grow moist. Anna suppressed an exclamation of triumph. She'd been right all along. Meanwhile, the inspector was hiding his face in his hands, and the girl felt overwhelmed by this exhibition of despair. "You know, I never told you anything because I didn't want to upset you, but I did a little investigation about Ingrid. You're not the only man. "But I knew that," said the inspector, his hand still over his face.
"What is it, then?"
"It's different this time. It's not some little fling like all the rest, which I could even forgive. She's in love, and he feels the same way."
"Do you know who she's in love with?"
"Yes, her father-in-law."
"Oh, Christ!"
said Anna, giving a start.
"She told you herself?"
"No, I found out on my own. Actually, she denies it. She denies everything. I need some kind of irrefutable proof, something to throw in her face. Do you know what I mean?" Anna had offered to provide him with this irrefutable proof, and she'd gone to such lengths that she even managed to take some pictures of that rustic episode in the woods. She'd had them enlarged by a trusted girlfriend of hers in the crime lab, and then turned them over to the inspector. Ingrid's father-in-law, aside from being chief physician at Montelusa Hospital, was also a prominent local politician, and so Montalbano sent the man some eloquent initial documentation at his provincial party office, the hospital, and to his home. On the back of each photo were only the words, "We've got you now." The barrage of images had apparently scared him to death. In a flash, he'd seen his career and family jeopardized. In case of need, the inspector had another 20 or so photographs. He'd said nothing about this to Ingrid. The woman might throw a fit if she knew her Swedish sense of privacy had been violated. Montalbano accelerated, now satisfied that the complex machinations he'd set in motion had achieved their desired goal. "You bring the car inside," said Montalbano, getting out and starting to raise the metal grille of the police garage. Once she'd pulled in, he turned on the lights and lowered the grille. "What do you want me to do?" Ingrid asked. "See that wrecked Fiat 500 over there? I want to know if its brakes have been tampered with." "I don't know if I'll be able to tell." "Try." "There goes my blouse." "No, wait. I brought something." He reached into the back seat of his car and pulled out a shirt and a pair of jeans that belonged to him. "Here, put these on." While Ingrid was changing, he went to look for a portable mechanic's lamp, found one on the counter and plugged it in. Without saying a word, Ingrid took the lamp, a monkey wrench and a screwdriver and slid under the little Fiat's twisted chassis. It took her only about 10 minutes. She came out from under the car covered with dust and grease. "I was lucky. The brake cable was partly cut, I'm sure of it." "What do you mean, partly?"
"I mean, it wasn't cut all the way through. They left just enough so the car wouldn't crash right away, but with the first hard pull, the cable would certainly have snapped."
"Are you positive it didn't break all by itself? It was a very old car."
"The cut is too clean. There's no shredding, or very little."
"Now listen closely," said Montalbano. "The man who was at the wheel drove from Vigata to Montelusa, stopped there a little while, then headed back to Vigata. The accident occurred on the steep descent right before you come into town, the Catena hillside. He slammed straight into a truck, and that was that. Clear so far?"
"Yes."
"What I want to know is this. In your opinion, was this slick little job done in Vigata or in Montelusa?"
"In Montelusa," said Ingrid. "If they'd done it in Vigata, he would definitely have crashed much sooner. Anything else?"
"No. Thanks." Ingrid didn't change her clothes and didn't even wash her hands.
"I'll do it at your house."
Ingrid got out in the bar's car park, took her car and followed the inspector. It was a warm evening, not yet midnight. "You want to take a shower?" he asked her when they got back to his place.
"No, I'd rather go for a swim. I'll shower later if I feel like it."
She took off the grease-stained clothes of Montalbano's that she was wearing and slipped out of her panties. The inspector, meanwhile, had to make some effort to reassume his much-suffered guise as spiritual adviser.
"Come on. "Take your clothes off and join me," she said.
"No, I like watching you from the veranda." The full moon was actually too bright. Montalbano remained in his deck chair, enjoying the sight of Ingrid's silhouette as she reached the water's edge and began a dance of little hops in the water, arms extended. He saw her dive in, following a while the small black dot that was her head, and then, suddenly, he fell asleep. When he awoke, day was already dawning. He got up, slightly chilled, made coffee, and drank 3 cups in a row. Before leaving, Ingrid had cleaned the house. There was no trace of her having been there. Ingrid was worth her weight in gold. She'd done everything he'd asked of her, and hadn't even wanted an explanation. As far as curiosity was concerned, she was certainly not female, but only as far as curiosity was concerned. Feeling a pang of hunger, he opened the refrigerator. The aubergine parmesan he hadn't eaten at lunchtime was gone, dispatched by Ingrid. He had to content himself with a piece of bread and some processed cheese. Better than nothing. He took a shower and put on the clothes he had lent to Ingrid. They still bore a trace of her scent. As was his habit, he arrived at headquarters about 10 minutes late. His men were all ready with 1 squad car and the jeep on loan from Vinti's, which was loaded up with shovels, mattocks, pickaxes and spades. They looked like labourers on their way to earn a day's pay working the land. The Crasto mountain, which for its part would never have dreamed of calling itself a mountain, was a rather bald little hill that rose up west of Vigata, barely 500 yards from the sea. It had been carefully pierced by a tunnel, now boarded up, that was supposed to have been an integral part of a road that started nowhere and led nowhere, a very useful bypass route for diverting funds into bottomless pockets. It was in fact called the bypass. Legend had it that deep in the mountain's bowels was a crasto, a ram made of solid gold. The tunnel diggers never found it, but those who won the bid for the government contract certainly did. Attached to the mountain, on the landward side, was a kind of stronghold of rock called the Crasticedru, the Little Crasto. The earth movers and trucks had never reached this area, and it preserved an untamed beauty. Having come down some virtually impassable roads to avoid attracting attention, the 2 cars headed straight for the Crasticedru. In the absence of any further path or trail, it was very hard to go on, but the inspector insisted that the cars pull right up to the foot of the rocky spur. Montalbano ordered everyone out of the cars. The air was cool, the morning bright. "What do you want us to do?" asked Fazio. "Search the Crasticedru, all of you, very carefully. Look everywhere, and look hard. There's supposed to be an entrance to a cave somewhere. It's been covered up, camouflaged by rocks or vegetation. Keep your eyes peeled. We have to find it. I assure you it's there." They fanned out. 2 hours later, discouraged, they met back up beside the cars. The sun was beating down, they were sweating, but far-sighted Fazio had brought along thermoses of coffee and tea. "Let's try again," said Montalbano. "But don't look only around the rock. Search also along the ground. You might see something that looks fishy." They resumed their hunt, and half an hour later Montalbano heard Galuzzo call from afar. "Inspector! Inspector! Come here!" The inspector went over to the policeman, who had assigned himself the side of the spur closest to the highway that went to Fela. "Look!" Someone had tried to make them disappear, but at a certain point along the ground there were clearly visible tracks left behind by a large truck. "They lead over there," said Galuzzo, pointing to the rock face. As he was saying this, he suddenly stopped, mouth agape. "Jesus God!" said Montalbano. How had they managed not to see it before? there was a huge boulder placed in an odd position, with shoots of withered grass sticking out from behind. As Galuzzo was calling to his mates, the inspector ran towards the boulder, grabbed a tuft of swordgrass, and tugged hard. He almost fell backwards. The clump had no roots. It had merely been stuck there with bunches of sorghum to camouflage the entrance to the cave.
This is the end of CD 2. The book continues on CD 3. CD 3.
Chapter 9. The boulder was a great stone slab, roughly rectangular in shape, that appeared to be of a piece with the rock around it, and rested on a sort of giant step, also rock. At a glance, Montalbano determined that it was about 6 feet tall and 4.5 feet wide. Moving it by hand was out of the question, and yet there had to be a way. Halfway up its right side, about 4 inches from the edge, was a perfectly natural-looking hole. If this was an actual wooden door, the inspector reasoned, that opening would be at the right height for inserting a doorknob. He took a pen out of his pocket and stuck it in the hole. The pen fitted all the way inside, but when Montalbano was about to put it back in his pocket, he noticed that the pen had soiled his hand. He looked at his fingers, then smelled them. "That's grease," he said to Fazio, the only person remaining beside him. The other policeman had taken shelter in the shade. Gallo had found a clump of sheep's sorrel and offered some to the others. "Suck the stalk," he said. "It's delicious and quenches your thirst." Montalbano thought of the only possible solution. "Do we have a steel cable?" "Sure do, inside the jeep." "All right, then pull the car up here as close as you can." As Fazio was walking away, the inspector, now convinced he'd found the proper expedient for moving the big slab, looked at the surrounding landscape with different eyes. If this was indeed the place that Tano the Greek had revealed to him on his deathbed, there must be some spot nearby from which one could keep it under surveillance. The area seemed deserted and remote. One would never have imagined that right behind the bluff, a few hundred yards away, was the highway with all its traffic. Not far from there, on a rise of dry, rocky terrain, was a minuscule cottage, a cube consisting of a single room. He called for some binoculars. The little structure's wooden door, which was closed, looked solid. Next to the door, at the height of a man's head, was a small window without shutters, protected by 2 criss-crossing iron bars. The cottage appeared uninhabited, and it was the only possible observation point in the vicinity. All the other houses were too far away. Still doubtful, he called to Galuzzo. "Go have a look at that little house. Do what you can to open the door, but don't break it in. Be careful, we may need to use it. See if there are any recent signs of life inside, if anyone's been living there in the last few days, but leave everything exactly as it was, as if you'd never been there." The jeep had meanwhile backed almost all the way up to the base of the boulder. The inspector took the end of the steel cable, inserted it easily into the hole, and started pushing it inside. This required little effort, for the cable slid into the boulder as if following a well-greased, unobstructed groove. In fact, a few seconds later, the cable end popped out on the other side of the slab, looking like the head of a snake. "Take this end," Montalbano told Fazio. "Fix it to the jeep, put the engine in gear and pull away, but very, very gently." As the jeep began to move, so did the boulder, its right side starting to come detached from the rock face, as if turning on invisible hinges. "Open sesame," Germanà murmured in amazement, recalling the children's formula that magically served to open all doors. I assure you, Commissioner, that stone slab was turned into a door by a superb master craftsman. Just imagine, the iron hinges were totally invisible from the outside. Closing the door was as easy as opening it. We went in with flashlights. Inside, the cave was very carefully and intelligently fitted out. They'd made a floor, for example, out of a dozen or so puncheons nailed together and set down on the bare earth. What's a puncheon? I can't think of the proper word. Let's just say they're very thick planks. They built a floor to keep the crates of weapons from coming into direct contact with the damp ground. The walls are covered with lighter boards. The whole inside of the cave is a sort of giant wooden box without a top. They obviously worked a long time on it. What about the weapons? A veritable arsenal. About 30 machine guns and submachine guns, 100 or so pistols and revolvers, 2 bazookas, thousands of ammunition rounds, cases of every kind of explosive from TNT to Semtex, and a large quantity of police and carabinieri uniforms, bulletproof vests, and various other things, all in perfect order, with each item wrapped in cellophane. We've really dealt them a serious blow, eh? Absolutely. Tarno avenged himself well, just enough to avoid looking like a traitor or repenter. I want you to know that I didn't sequester the weapons. I left them in the cave. I've arranged for my men to stand guard in 2 shifts round the clock. They're in an uninhabited cottage a few hundred yards away from the arms depot. You're hoping someone will come for supplies? That's the idea? Good. I agree with that. We'll wait a week, keep everything under close watch, and if nothing happens, we'll go ahead with the seizure. Ah, Montalbano, do you remember my dinner invitation for the day after tomorrow? How could I forget? I'm afraid we'll have to postpone it a few days. My wife has the flu. There was no need to wait a week. The 3rd day after they had discovered the weapons, Cattarella, having completed his midnight to midday shift on guard, went to report to Montalbano, asleep on his feet. The inspector had asked them all to do the same as soon as they went off duty. Any news? Nothing, Chief. All peacefulness and quietude. Good. Actually, bad. Go and get some sleep. Wait. Now that I put my head to it, there was something, nothing, really. I just thought I'd tell you more out of consciousness than duty, but it's nothing. What kind of nothing? A tourist came by. Explain a little better, Cat. It looked to be around 2100 hours in the morning. If it was morning, it was 9, Cat. Whatever you say. Then right there and there, I heard the roar of a motorcycle, so I grabbed the binoculars around my neck and precautiously looked out the window for confirmation. The motorcycle was red. The colour is of no importance. Then what? Then a tourist of the male sex descended from off said motorcycle. What made you think he was a tourist? He was wearing a camera around his neck, a really big camera, so big it looked like a cannon. Must have been a telephoto lens. Yes, sir, that it was. Then he started taking telephotos. Of what? Everything, Chief, everything. The countryside, the Cresti Cedro, even the location I was located in. Did he get close to the Cresti Cedro? Never, sir. But when he climbed back on his motorcycle to leave, he waved at me with his hands. He saw you? No, I stayed inside the whole time. But as I was saying, once he started up, he waved goodbye to the little house. Commissioner, I've got some news and it's not good. Looks like they somehow got wind of our discovery and sent somebody on reconnaissance to confirm. And how do you know this? This morning, the man on duty in the cottage saw some guy arrive on a motorcycle and take photographs of the whole area with a powerful telephoto. They must have set up a very specific marker around the boulder blocking the entrance, like, say, a stick pointing in a certain direction, a rock placed a certain distance away. It simply would not have been possible for us to put everything back exactly the way it was. Excuse me, but had you given precise instructions to the officer on duty? Of course. The man on duty should have stopped the motorcyclist, identified him, confiscated the camera, and brought him to the station. So why didn't he? For one very simple reason. The officer was Cattarella, whom we both know well. Ah, was the Commissioner's laconic reply. What do we do now? We'll go ahead and sequester the arms immediately, today. Palermo has ordered me to give it maximum coverage. Montalbano felt his armpits getting soaked in sweat. Another press conference? I'm afraid so. Sorry. As he was about to leave for the Crasticedru with 2 cars and a van, Montalbano noticed Galuzzo imploring him with his eyes like a battered dog. He called him aside. What's the problem? Think I could invite my brother-in-law, the newsman? No, Montalbano said at once, but he immediately reconsidered. Another idea had come into his mind, and he felt very pleased with himself for having thought of it. Listen, he said. Okay, as a favour to you, give him a call and tell him to come. The idea was that if Galuzzo's brother-in-law was there on the spot and gave the discovery sufficient publicity, the need for the press conference might just go up in smoke. Montalbano not only allowed Galuzzo's brother-in-law and his televigata cameraman a free hand, he actually helped them stage their scoop by acting as director. He had his men assemble a bazooka, which Fazio then mounted on his shoulder as if to fire, then had the cave brightly illuminated so that every cartridge clip, every magazine, could be filmed or photographed. After 2 hours of serious work, the cave was completely emptied of its cargo. The news reporter and his cameraman raced off to Montelusa to edit their feature, and Montalbano called the Commissioner on a cell phone. It's all loaded up. Good. Send it here to me in Montelusa. And one more thing. Leave a man on duty. Giacomuzzi will soon be there with the crime lab team. Congratulations. It was Giacomuzzi, in the end, who took care of setting the idea of the press conference definitively to rest. Wholly involuntarily, of course, since Giacomuzzi was blissfully in his element at press conferences and interviews. In fact, before coming to the cave to gather evidence, the crime lab chief had taken the trouble to alert some 20 journalists from the press and television. Thus, while the report put together by Galuzzo's brother-in-law quickly reverberated in the local news, the commotion unleashed by the stories on Giacomuzzi and his men had national resonance. The Commissioner, as Montalbano had correctly foreseen, decided to call off the press conference, since everyone already knew everything, and settled for issuing a detailed press release instead. At home in his underpants, and with a large bottle of beer in his hand, Montalbano relished the sight of Giacomuzzi's face on TV the whole time in close-up, as the head of the crime lab explained how his men were dismantling the wooden construction inside the cave piece by piece, searching for the slightest clue, any hint of a fingerprint, any trace of a footprint. When the cave was stripped bare, restored to its primordial state, the free channel cameraman did a long, slow pan of the whole interior. And in the course of this shot, the inspector saw something that didn't look right to him. It was just an impression, nothing more, but he might as well check it out. He phoned the free channel and asked for Niccolò Zitto, the communist journalist, and his friend. No problem. I'll have it sent over to you. But I haven't got one of those thingamajigs, whatever the hell they're called. Then come and watch it here. Would tomorrow morning around 11 be all right? That's fine. I won't be here, but I'll leave word. At 9 o'clock the next morning, Montalbano went to Montelusa, to the headquarters of the party that Cavaliere Misuraca had served. The plaque next to the main door indicated that the offices were on the 5th floor, but the treacherous sign did not specify that the only way to get there was on foot, since the building was not equipped with a lift. After climbing at least 10 flights of stairs, and a little out of breath, Montalbano knocked and knocked on a door that remained stubbornly closed. He went back down the stairs and out into the street. Right next door was a greengrocer. Inside, an elderly man was serving a customer. The inspector waited until the greengrocer was alone. "Did you know Cavaliere Misuraka?"
And who, may I ask, gives a fuck who I know and who I don't?
"I give a fuck. I'm with the police."
All right. And I'm Lenin.
"Are you trying to be funny?"
Not at all. That's really my name. My father named me Lenin, and I'm proud of it. But maybe you're of the same stripe as the people next door."
"No, I'm not. Anyway, I'm only here on a case, so I'll repeat my question. Did you know Cavaliere Misuraka?"
I certainly did. He spent his whole life going in and out of that door and busting my balls with his rattletrap Fiat 500.
"Did the car bother you?"
Did it bother me? He always parked it in front of my store, even on the day he smashed into that truck.
"He parked it right here."
Do I speak Turkish or something? Right here he parked it, and I asked him to move it, but he went nuts and started yelling and said he didn't have time to waste on me. So I got really mad and gave him hell. Anyway, to make a long story short, we were about to go at it when luckily some kid passed by and told the late Cavaliere he'd be happy to move the car for him. So Misuraka gave him the keys.
"Do you know where he parked it?"
No, sir.
"You think you could recognize this kid? Had you ever seen him before?"
"I've seen him sometimes going in next door. Must be a member of their fancy club."
"The party chief's name is Biragin, isn't it?"
"Something like that. He's from around Venice somewhere. Works at the public housing office. He's probably there now. This place here won't reopen till after 6. Right now it's too early."
"Mr. Biragin!" he shouted into the public phone. "This is Inspector Montalbano of Vigata Police. Sorry to disturb you at work."
"Not at all. What can I do for you?"
"I need you to remember something for me. The last party meeting attended by Cavaliere Misuraka. What kind of meeting was it?"
"I don't understand the question."
"No need to get touchy, sir. This is just a routine investigation to clarify the circumstances of the Cavaliere's death."
"Why? Was there something unclear about it?"
A real pain in the arse, this Ferdinando Biragin. "It's all clear as day, I assure you."
"So, what's the problem?"
"I have to close the file, understand? I can't leave a dossier incomplete." Upon hearing the words file and dossier, Biragin, a bureaucrat from the public housing office, changed his tune at once.
"Yes, of course, I know how it is. Well, it was a meeting of the local party leadership, which the Cavaliere was not entitled to attend. But we stretched the rules a little."
"So it was a rather small meeting?"
"About 10 people.
"Did anyone come looking for the Cavaliere?"
"No. We'd locked the door. I would remember something like that. Actually, he did get a phone call."
"Pardon my asking, but I assume you're unfamiliar with the tenor of that conversation?"
"I'm not only familiar with the tenor, I also know the bass, the baritone, and the soprano."
He laughed. Such a wit, this Ferdinando Biragin.
"You know how the Cavaliere spoke, of course," Biragin continued, "as if everyone else were deaf. It was hard not to overhear when he was talking. Just imagine, on one occasion—"
"I'm sorry, sir, I haven't got much time. So you were able to grasp the—" He stopped, discarding the word tenor to spare himself another dose of Biragin's tragic sense of humour. "The gist of that phone call?"
"Of course. Somebody had done the Cavaliere the favour of moving his car, and by way of thanks, the Cavaliere only scolded him for parking it too far away."
"Were you able to tell who it was that called?"
"No. Why do you ask?"
"Because," said Montalbano, and he hung up. So the kid, having completed his deadly little service in the shelter of some complicitous garage, had also decided, just for fun, to make the Cavaliere get a little exercise. At the Free Channel Studios, Montalbano explained to a polite young woman that he was utterly hopeless when it came to anything electronic. Turning on a television, yes. Flipping the channels, turning it off, no problem. As for the rest, utter darkness. With patience and grace, the girl put in the cassette, then started to rewind it, stopping the image every time Montalbano asked. By the time he left the free channel offices, the inspector was convinced he'd seen exactly what had aroused his interest. But what had aroused his interest seemed not to make any sense. Chapter 10. He stood outside the Trattoria San Calogero, undecided. It was indeed time to eat, and his stomach certainly felt empty. And yet an idea that had come to him while watching the videotape, and which demanded to be verified, was pushing him to continue on to the Crasticedro. The scent of fried mullet coming from the restaurant won the duel. He ate a special appetizer of shellfish, then had them bring him 2 sea perches so fresh they seemed to be still swimming in the sea. "You're eating without conviction, Inspector." "It's true. The fact is, I've got something on my mind." "The mind should be forgotten when the Lord, in His grace, puts such perches in front of you," Calogero said solemnly, walking away. He passed by the office to see if there was any news. "Giacomuzzi called several times for you," Germana informed him. "If he calls again, tell him I'll get back to him later. Do you have a very powerful flashlight?" After turning off the main road and stopping near the Crasticedro, he abandoned the car and decided to proceed on foot. It was a beautiful day, with a light breath of wind that cooled the air and lifted Montalbano's spirits. The ground around the rocky spur was marked by tyre tracks, apparently left by people who had come up there out of curiosity. The boulder that served as the door had been pulled open several yards, the cave entrance now entirely exposed. As he was about to enter, he stopped, pricking up his ears. From inside came a low murmur, occasionally interrupted by some stifled moans. He became alarmed. "Want to bet they're torturing someone in there?" There wasn't time to run back to the car to get his pistol. He bounded inside, simultaneously turning on the powerful flashlight. "Everybody freeze! Police!" The 2 people inside the cave froze, but the greatest chill was felt by Montalbano himself. They were a very young couple, completely nude, making love. She with her hands braced against the wall, arms extended, he glued to her from behind. In the glare of the flashlight, they looked like statues, beautiful. The inspector felt his face burning with shame. Turning off the flashlight, he started to withdraw, awkwardly muttering, "I'm sorry. It was a mistake. Don't let me bother you." They came out less than a minute later. It doesn't take long to put one's jeans and T-shirt back on. Montalbano was truly sorry for having interrupted them. In their way, the 2 youngsters had been reconsecrating the cave, now that it was no longer a depository of death. The boy passed in front of him, head bowed and hands in his pockets. The girl instead glanced at him a moment, smiling faintly, an amused glint in her eye. A simple, superficial reconnaissance of the site was all the inspector needed to confirm that what he had noticed in the videotape corresponded to what he was seeing in reality, that while the sides of the cave were relatively smooth and solid, the lower part of the rear wall, that is, the surface opposite the entrance, was quite uneven in texture, with protuberances and recesses, and might at first glance appear sloppily chiselled. But there was nothing chiselled about it. In fact, it consisted of stones stacked one atop and beside the other. Time had since taken care of binding and cementing them, camouflaging them with dust, earth, seeping water and saltpeter, finally transforming the rough surface into an almost natural wall. He continued looking very closely, exploring inch by inch, and in the end He no longer had any doubt. At the back of the cave, there must be an opening at least 3 feet square that had been covered over quite a few years ago. Giacomuzzi, Montalbano here. I absolutely need you to— Do you mind telling me where you've been hiding your ass? I spent the whole morning looking for you. Well, I'm here now. I found a piece of cardboard from a parcel, or rather from a large box, the kind used for shipping. You tell a secret, I tell a secret. I once found a red button. What an arsehole you are! I'm not going to say any more. Oh, come on, honey buns, don't be offended. On this piece of cardboard are some printed letters. I found it under the wooden underframe of the cave. It must have slipped through one of the interstices between the planks. What was that word you said? Underframe? No, after that. Interstices? Yes. My, aren't we educated? And so well spoken. Did you find anything else under this, whatever you called it? Yes. Rusted nails. A button, in fact, but this one was black. A pencil stub and some scraps of paper, but the dampness had turned them all to mush. That piece of cardboard is still in good condition because it had apparently been there only a few days. Send it down to me. Listen, have you got an echo sounder and anyone who might know how to use it? Yes. We used it at Missilmesi just last week to look for 3 dead bodies, which we eventually found. Could you have it here to me in Vigata by 5 o'clock? Are you insane? It's 4:30. Let's say in 2 hours. I'll bring it myself, along with the cardboard. But what do you need it for? To sound your little behind. Headmaster Burgio is here for you. Says if you'll see him, he has something to tell you. It won't take more than 5 minutes. Show him in. Headmaster Burgio had already been retired for 10 years or so, but everyone still called him by that title because he'd been headmaster of the Vigata Business School. He and Montalbano were well acquainted. The headmaster was a very cultured, energetic man with a keen interest in life, despite his age, and he sometimes accompanied the inspector on his restful walks along the jetty. The inspector stood up to greet him. "How nice to see you. Please, sit down." "Since I was in the neighborhood, I thought I'd ask if I could talk to you. If I hadn't found you in the office, I would have phoned." "What can I do for you?" "I wanted to let you know a few things about the cave where you found those weapons. I'm not sure it'll be of any interest, but—" "Are you kidding? Tell me everything you know." "Well, let me state first that what I'm about to say is based on what I've heard on the local TV and read in the newspapers. It's possible they got a few things wrong. In any case, somebody said that the boulder covering the cave entrance had been made into a door by mafiosi, or by whoever was trafficking in weapons. It's not true. This work of, let's call it adjustment, was done by the grandfather of a very dear friend of mine, Lillo Rizzitano." "How long ago? Do you know?" "Of course I know. It was in about 1941, when oil, flour, and wheat were growing scarce because of the war. At that time, all the land around the Crasto and the Crasticedru belonged to Giacomo Rizzitano, Lillo's grandfather, who had made a lot of money in America by less than legitimate means. Or at least that's what people in town said. Anyway, it was Giacomo Rizzitano's idea to seal off the cave by turning that boulder into a door. Inside it, they kept all sorts of good things, selling them on the black market with the help of his son Pietro, Lillo's father. They were unscrupulous men who'd been implicated in other affairs which decent people at the time never talked about, including, apparently, some acts of violence. Lillo, on the other hand, had turned out differently. He was sort of literary. He wrote nice poems and read a lot.
It was he who first introduced me to Pavese's Paesi Tuoi, Vittorini's Conversazione in Sicilia, and so on. I used to go to visit him, usually when his parents weren't there, in a small house right at the foot of the Crasto, on the seaward side.
Was it demolished to build the tunnel?
Yes, or more precisely, the earth movers working on the tunnel merely got rid of the ruins and foundations, since the house was literally pulverized during the bombings that preceded the Allied landing in 1943.
Think you could track down this Lillo friend of yours?
I don't even know whether he's dead or alive, or where he's lived since then. I say this because you should bear in mind that Lillo was, or is, 4 years older than me.
Tell me, Mr. Burgio, have you ever been inside that cave?
No. I once asked Lillo, but he said no. He had strict orders from his father and grandfather. He was very afraid of them. The fact that he'd even told me the secret of the cave was already a lot.
Officer Balassone, despite his Piedmontese name, spoke Milanese dialect, and always wore a haggard face worthy of the Day of the Dead.
«Le el dì di mort allegher»,
Montalbano thought upon seeing him, reminded of the title of a poem by Delio Tessa. After half an hour of fussing about with his instrument at the back of the cave, Balassone removed his headset and gave the inspector an even more disconsolate look than usual, if that was possible.
I was wrong, thought Montalbano, and now I'm going to look like a stupid shit in Giacomuzzi's eyes.
Giacomuzzi, for his part, after 10 minutes inside the cave, had made it known he suffered from claustrophobia and gone outside.
Maybe because now there aren't any TV cameras pointed at you, Montalbano thought maliciously.
So, the inspector finally asked Balassone to confirm his failure.
"It's there, behind the wall,"
Balassone said mysteriously. He was not only a melancholic, but also a man of few words. "Would you please tell me, if it's not asking too much, exactly what is there behind the wall?" asked Montalbano, who was becoming dangerously polite.
"On sit voce."
"Would you please have the courtesy to speak Italian?" The appearance and tone seemed those of an 18th century gentleman of the court. Baldassone had no idea that if he went on at this rate, he was in line to have his nose rearranged. Luckily for him, he obeyed.
"There's a hollow," he said, "and it's as big as this cave here."
The inspector took comfort. He'd seen right. At that moment, Giacomuzzi came in.
"Find anything?"
With his immediate superior, Baldassone's tongue suddenly loosened. Montalbano gave him a dirty look.
"Yes, sir," said the Piedmontese. "There apparently is another cave behind this one. It's like something I saw once on television. There was this Eskimo's house. What do you call them? Oh, yes, this igloo. And right next to it was another igloo. And the two igloos were connected by a kind of passageway, a short, low corridor. It's the same here." "At a rough glance," said Giacomuzzi, "I'd say the passage between the two caves must date from a good number of years ago." "Yes, sir," said Baldassone, looking more and more weary. "If any weapons were hidden in the other cave, they'd have to go back at least as far as the Second World War."
The first thing Montalbano noticed about the piece of cardboard, which the crime lab had dutifully inserted in a little transparent plastic bag, was that it had the same shape as Sicily. In the middle of it were some letters printed in black, Atto Cat. "Fazio? At your service. Get Vintis to lend you the jeep and shovels and pickaxes again. We're going back to the Crasticedru tomorrow. You, me, Germanà, and Galuzzo." "This is becoming a bad habit," Fazio cried out. Montalbano felt tired. In the fridge he found some boiled squid and a slice of nicely aged caciocavallo cheese. He set himself up on the veranda. When he had finished eating, he went to look in the freezer, and there he found a tub of lemon ice, which the housekeeper made regularly for him by following a 1-2-4 formula. 1 glass of lemon juice, 2 of sugar, and 4 of water. A finger-licking delight. Then he decided to stretch out on the bed and finish the novel by Montalban. He was unable to read even a chapter. Despite his interest, sleep got the better of him. He woke up with a start less than 2 hours later. He looked at his watch. Barely 11 o'clock. As he was putting the watch back on the bedside table, his eye fell on the piece of cardboard which he'd brought with him. He picked it up and went into the bathroom. Sitting on the toilet in the cold fluorescent light, he studied it closely. Suddenly an idea flashed in his brain. For a moment it seemed as if the bathroom light were growing steadily in intensity until it exploded in a luminescent burst. He started laughing. Is it possible ideas only come to me when I'm on the loo? He studied the piece of cardboard again and again. I'll try again tomorrow morning, with a cooler head. But it was not to be. After 15 minutes of tossing and turning in bed, he got up, grabbed the phone book, and looked up the number of Captain Aliotta of the Customs Police in Montelusa, who was a friend of his. Sorry to call so late, but I urgently need some information. Have you ever done any inspections at the supermarket of a certain Carmelo Ingrassia in Vigata? The name doesn't ring a bell, and if I can't remember, it probably means that there was an inspection, but it turned up nothing irregular. Thanks. Wait! The person responsible for these kinds of procedures is Sergeant Lagana. If you want, I'll have him phone you at home. You're at home, right? Yes. Give me 10 minutes. He had enough time to go into the kitchen and drink a glass of cold water before the telephone rang. Lagana speaking. The captain filled me in. The last inspection check at that supermarket was 2 months ago. Everything was in order. Was it done at your own instigation? Just a routine check. Nothing out of order. In fact, it's not that often we come across a store owner with his papers in such good order. If somebody wanted to screw him, they'd have nothing to grab onto. And you checked everything? Accounts, invoices, receipts? Excuse me, Inspector, but how do you think we do our checks? Asked the sergeant, starting to sound a little testy. For heaven's sake, Sergeant, I didn't mean to cast any doubt. That wasn't the reason for my question. You see, I'm unfamiliar with certain procedures, and that's why I'm asking for your help. How do these supermarkets get their stocks? From wholesalers. They might use 5 or 10 different ones, depending on what they need. I see. Would you be able to tell me who the suppliers of the Ingrassia supermarket are? I think so. I should have some notes around here somewhere. I really appreciate this. I'll call you tomorrow at the barracks. But I'm at the barracks right now. Stay on the line. Montalbano heard some whistling. Hello, Inspector. Here we are. The wholesalers that stock Ingrassia. There's 3 from Milan, 1 from Bergamo, 1 in Taranto, 1 in Catania. Take this down. In Milan... Wait, excuse me for interrupting. Start with Catania. The corporate name of the Catanian company is Pan, like frying pan. Owned by Salvatore Nicosia, who resides at... It didn't add up. Thanks, that's enough. Wait, here's something else I'd forgotten about. The supermarket is also supplied by another wholesaler, also in Catania, for its household goods. That one's called Brancato. Atto, cat, the piece of cardboard said. Brancato, Catania. It added up, and how? Montalbano's cry of joy thundered in the sergeant's earpiece, frightening him. Inspector? Inspector! Oh, my God, what happened? Are you all right, Inspector? Chapter 11. Fresh and smiling, in jacket and tie and enveloped in a haze of cologne, Montalbano showed up at the home of Francesco Lacomare, manager of the Ingrassia supermarket, at 7 o'clock in the morning. The manager greeted him not only with legitimate astonishment, but also in his underwear, with a glass of milk in his hand. "What is it?" he asked, turning pale upon recognizing the inspector. "Two simple little questions, and I'll get out of your hair. But first, one very serious stipulation. This meeting must remain between you and me. If you speak to anyone at all about it, even your boss, I'll find an excuse to throw your ass in jail, and you can bank on that." As Lacomare was struggling to recover his breath, a shrill, annoying female voice exploded inside the apartment. "Cicino, who's that at this hour?" "It's nothing, Carmelina. Go back to sleep," Lacomare reassured her, pulling the door shut behind him. "Do you mind, Inspector, if we talk over here on the landing? The top floor, the one right above us, is vacant, so there's no danger anyone will bother us." "Who do you buy from in Catania?" "From Pan and Brancato." "Do they have fixed delivery schedules?" "Once a week for Pan, once a month for Brancato. We've coordinated it with the other supermarkets that use the same wholesalers." "Very good. So, as I understand it, Brancato will load up a truck with merchandise and send it out to make the rounds of the supermarkets. Now, where on these rounds is your store situated?" "Let me explain. Better." "I understand, Inspector. The truck leaves Catania, services the Caltanissetta area first, then Trapani, then Montelusa. The Vigata markets are the last ones the truck visits before heading back to Catania." "One last question. The merchandise those thieves took and then left behind—" "You're very intelligent, Inspector." "You are too, if you can answer me before I've asked you a question." "The fact is, this whole story's been keeping me up at night. Here's the problem. The Brancato merchandise was delivered early. We were expecting it first thing the next morning, but it arrived the evening before, just as we were closing. The driver told us one of his supermarkets in Trapani had been suddenly closed for mourning, so he was ahead of schedule. Mr. Ingrassia, to free up the truck, had it unloaded, checked the list, and counted the crates. But he didn't have anyone open them up, said it was too late. He didn't want to pay anybody overtime and said we could do everything the next day. A few hours later, the store was robbed. So my question is, who told the robbers the merchandise had arrived early?" Lacomare was putting some passion into his reasoning. Montalbano decided to play devil's advocate. After all, the manager must not be allowed to get too close to the truth. That might cause trouble. Most of all, it was obvious he was unaware of Ingrassia's trafficking. "The two things aren't necessarily connected," the inspector said. "The thieves could have come to rob what you already had in storage and ended up finding the freshly delivered merchandise instead." "Yes, but then why leave it all behind?" That was, indeed, the question. Montalbano was hesitant to give an answer that might satisfy Lacomare's curiosity. "But who the fuck is that anyway?" asked the now enraged female voice from within. She must have been a woman of delicate sentiment, this Signora Lacomare. Montalbano took advantage of the interruption to leave. He'd found out what he wanted to know. "My respects to your lovely wife," he said, starting back down the stairs. When he reached the front door, however, he sprang back upstairs like a tethered ball and rang the doorbell. "You again?" Lacomare had drunk his milk, but was still in his underwear. "I'm sorry, I forgot something. Are you sure the truck was completely empty after you unloaded it?" "No, I didn't say that. There was still about 15 large crates. The driver said they belonged to that supermarket in Trapani that he'd found closed." "But what is all this fucking commotion so early in the morning?" Signora Carmelina shrieked from within, and Montalbano fled without even saying goodbye. I think I've determined, with reasonable accuracy, the route the weapons travelled before reaching the cave. Bear with me, Mr. Commissioner. Here goes. In some way that we have yet to discover, the weapons come to the Brancato firm in Catania from some other part of the world. Brancato warehouses them and puts them in big boxes with the company name on them, so they look like they contain normal electrical appliances to be sold in supermarkets. When they receive the order to deliver, the Brancato people load the boxes with the weapons onto the truck along with the rest. As a precaution, along some stretch of road between Catania and Caltanissetta, they replace the company truck with a stolen one. That way, if anybody finds the weapons, Brancatos can claim they had nothing to do with it. They know nothing about it. The truck isn't theirs, and in fact, they themselves were robbed. The stolen truck begins its circuit, dropping off the clean crates at the various supermarkets it supplies, then heads off to Vigata. Before arriving, however, it stops in the middle of the night at the Crasticedru and unloads the weapons in the cave. Early that morning, according to Lacomare, the store manager, they deliver their final packages to the Ingrassia supermarket and then leave. On the way back to Catania, the stolen truck is then replaced by the company's actual truck, which returns home as if it has made its full journey. Maybe they take care to tinker with the odometer each time. And they've been playing this little game for at least 3 years, since Giacomuzzi said that the outfitting of the cave in fact goes back 3 years. Your explanation makes excellent, logical sense, said the Commissioner, but I still don't understand the whole charade of the phony robbery. They acted out of necessity. Do you remember that gunfight between a patrol of carabinieri and 3 thugs in the Santa Lucia countryside, where one carabiniere was wounded? Yes, I do remember it. But what's that got to do with this? The local radio stations broadcast the news around 9 p.m., right when the truck was on its way to the Crasticedru. Santa Lucia is only about 1.5 miles away from the cave. The traffickers must have heard the news on the radio. It would have been stupid to let themselves be spotted in a deserted place by some patrol, of which there were many that night racing to the site of the shootout. So they decided to push on to Vigata. They were certain to run into a roadblock, but that was the lesser evil at this point, since they stood a good chance of slipping through. And that's what happened. So they arrive well ahead of schedule and make up the story about the supermarket closed for mourning in Trapani. Ingrassia, who's been alerted of the hitch, has his employees unload the truck, which then pretends to head back to Catania. It's still carrying the weapons, those same crates which they told Lacomare, the manager, were supposed to have gone to the supermarket in Trapani. The truck is then hidden somewhere around Vigata on Ingrassia's or some accomplice's property. I ask you again, why fake the heist? From where they'd hidden it, the truck could have easily gone back to the Crasticedru without having to pass through Vigata. But it did have to pass through Vigata. If they'd been stopped by the carabinieri, the customs police, or whomever, with those 15 crates aboard, unaccompanied by any delivery note, they would have aroused suspicion. They'd have been forced to open one, and that would have been the end of that. They absolutely did have to take back the packages that Ingrassia had unloaded, and which he had every reason not to open. I'm beginning to understand. So, at a certain hour of the night, the truck returns to the supermarket. The night watchman is in no position to recognize either the delivery men or the truck, because he wasn't yet on duty when they came the previous evening. They load the still-sealed packages, head off to the Crasticedru, unload the weapons crates, turn back round, ditch the truck in the car park behind the filling station, and their work is done. But can you tell me why they didn't simply get rid of the stolen merchandise and head back to Catania? That's the stroke of genius. By leaving the truck behind with all the stolen merchandise inside, they throw us off their trail. We're automatically forced to assume some kind of flap, a threat, a warning for not paying one's protection dues. In short, they force us to investigate at a lower level, the kind of stuff that is unfortunately an everyday matter in this part of Italy. And Ingrassia plays his part very well, absurdly calling it all a practical joke." "A real stroke of genius," said the Commissioner. "Yes, but if you look closely enough, you can always uncover a mistake. In our case, they didn't realize that a piece of cardboard had slipped under the planks that served as the cave's floor." Right, the Commissioner said pensively. Then, as if to himself, "Who knows where the empty boxes ended up?" he queried. Now and then the Commissioner would pause in idiotic wonder over meaningless details. "They probably loaded them into some car and burned them out in the country, because some accomplices brought at least 2 cars to the Crasticedru, perhaps to take the driver away after he ditched the truck behind the petrol station. So, without that piece of cardboard, we would never have discovered anything," the Commissioner concluded. "Well, not exactly," said Montalbano. "I was following another path that would eventually have led me to the same conclusions. They were forced, you see, to kill a poor old man." The Commissioner gave a start, darkening. "A murder? Why was I not informed of this?" "Because it was made to look like an accident. I only ascertained a couple of nights ago that the brakes on his car had been tampered with." "Was it Giacomuzzi who told you?" "For the love of God! Giacomuzzi, bless his soul, is certainly competent, but mixing him up in this would have been like issuing a press release." "One of these days I'm going to give that Giacomuzzi a good dressing down. I'm going to skin him alive," said the Commissioner, sighing. "Now tell me the whole story, but slowly and in chronological order." Montalbano told him about Misurata and the letter the Cavaliere had sent him. "He was murdered needlessly," he concluded. "His killers didn't know he'd already written to me and told me everything. Listen, explain to me what reason Ingrassia had for being near his supermarket while the phony robbery was taking place, if we're to believe Misurata. If there were any other snags, an untimely visit, for example, he could jump out and readily explain that everything was all right and they were sending the merchandise back because the people at Brancato's had got the order wrong. And what about the night watchman in the freezer? He was no longer a problem. They would have bumped him off." "How should we proceed?" the Commissioner asked after a pause. "Tano the Greek has given us a tremendous gift, even without naming any names," Montalbano began, "and we shouldn't waste it. If we go about this carefully, we could get our hands on a network the size of which we can't even imagine, but we've got to be cautious. If we immediately arrest Ingrassia or someone from the Brancato firm, we'll come up empty for all our effort. We need to aim for the bigger fish." "I agree," said the Commissioner. "I'll call Catania and tell them to put a tail on—" He broke off with a grimace, painfully remembering the mole who talked in Palermo and brought about Tano's death. There might well be another in Catania. "Let's start at the bottom," he decided. "We'll put only Ingrassia under surveillance." "All right. I'll get the court order from the judge," said the inspector. As he was heading out of the door, the Commissioner called him back inside. "By the way, my wife is feeling much better. How would Saturday evening do for you? We have a lot to discuss." He found Judge Lobianco in an unusually good mood, his eyes sparkling. "You look well," the inspector couldn't help saying. Yes, I'm quite well, in fact." He then looked around, assumed a conspiratorial air, leaned towards Montalbano, and said in a low voice, "Did you know that Rinaldo had 6 fingers on his right hand?" Montalbano faltered a moment, befuddled. Then he remembered that the judge had been working devotedly for years on a ponderous book entitled The life and deeds of Rinaldo and Antonio Lobianco, masters of law at the University of Girgenti at the time of King Martin the Younger, 1402 to 1409. Lobianco had got it into his head that the two ancient barristers were his ancestors. "Oh, really?" Montalbano asked with jovial surprise. It was best to humour him. "Yes, indeed. 6 fingers on his right hand." Jerking off must have been heaven, Montalbano was about to say sacrilegiously, but managed to restrain himself. He told the judge everything about the weapons traffic and Misuraka's murder. He even detailed the strategy he wanted to follow, and asked him for a court order to tap Ingracia's phone lines. Normally, Lobianco would have raised objections, created obstacles, imagined problems. This time, delighted with his discovery of Rinaldo's 6-fingered hand, he would have granted Montalbano an order to torture, impale, or burn someone at the stake. He went home, put on his bathing suit, went for a long, long swim, came back inside, dried himself off, but did not get dressed again. There was nothing in the refrigerator, but in the oven sat, as on a throne, a casserole with 4 huge servings of pasta incasciata, a dish worthy of Olympus. He ate 2 portions, put the casserole back in the oven, set his alarm clock, slept like a rock for 1 hour, got back up, took a shower, put his already dirty jeans and shirt back on, and went to the station. Fazio, Germanà and Galuzzo were waiting for him in their work clothes. As soon as they saw him, they grabbed their shovels, pickaxes, and mattocks and struck up the old day labourers' chorus, shaking their tools in the air. "Give land to those who work! Give land to those who work!" "Fucking idiots," was Montalbano's only comment. Prestia, Galuzzo's newsman brother-in-law, was already there at the entrance of the Crasticedru cave, along with a cameraman who had brought along 2 large battery-powered floodlights. Montalbano gave Galuzzo a dirty look. "Well," the latter said, blushing, "I just thought that since you allowed him last time—" All right, the inspector cut him off. They entered the weapons cave, and when Montalbano gave the order, Fazio, Germanà and Galuzzo started working on removing the stones that had fused together over the years. They laboured for a good 3 hours, and even Prestia, the cameraman and the inspector joined in, periodically relieving the 3 men. In the end, the wall came down. They could clearly see the little passageway, just as Balassone had said. The rest was lost in darkness. "You go in first," Montalbano said to Fazio. The sergeant took a flashlight, started crawling on his belly, and disappeared. A few seconds later, they heard an astonished voice from the other side. "Oh, my God! Inspector, you have to see this!" "The rest of you come in when I call you," said Montalbano to the others, looking especially at the newsman, who upon hearing Fazio had started forward and was about to throw himself to the ground and start crawling. The little tunnel was roughly the same length as the inspector's body. An instant later, he was on the other side, and he turned on his flashlight. The second cave was smaller than the first, and immediately gave the impression of being perfectly dry. In the very middle was a rug, still in good condition. In the far left corner of the rug, a bowl. To the right, in the symmetrically corresponding position, a jug. Forming the vertex of this upside-down triangle at the near end of the rug was a life-size shepherd dog made of terracotta. And on the rug were 2 dead bodies, all shriveled up as in a horror film, embracing. Montalbano felt short of breath. He couldn't open his mouth. He remembered the 2 youngsters he had surprised in the act of making love in the other cave. The men took advantage of his silence and, unable to resist, came in one after the other. The cameraman turned on his floods and began frantically filming. Nobody spoke. The first to recover was Montalbano. "Call the crime lab, the judge, and Dr. Pasquano," he said. He didn't even turn around towards Fazio to give the order. He just stood there, in a trance, staring at that scene, afraid that his slightest gesture might wake him from the dream he was living. Chapter 12. Rousing himself from the spell that had paralyzed him, Montalbano started shouting to everyone to stand with their backs to the wall and not to move, not to tread on the floor of the cave, which was covered with a very fine, reddish sand. Where it had filtered in from was anyone's guess. Maybe it was on the walls. There was no trace of this sand whatsoever in the other cave. Perhaps it had somehow halted the decomposition of the corpses. These were a man and a woman, their ages impossible to determine by sight. That they were of different sex, the inspector could tell by the shapes of their bodies, and not, of course, by any sexual attributes, which had been obliterated by natural process. The man was lying on his side, arm extended across the breast of the woman, who was supine. They were therefore embracing, and would remain in that embrace forever. In fact, what had once been the flesh of the man's arm had sort of stuck to and fused with the flesh of the woman's breast. No, they would be separated soon enough by the hand of Dr. Pasquano. Standing out under the wizened, shriveled flesh was the white of their bones. The lovers had been dried out, reduced to pure form. They looked as if they were laughing, the lips pulled back, stretched about the mouth and showing the teeth. Next to the dead man's head was the bowl, with some round objects inside. Next to the woman was the earthenware jug, the kind in which peasants used to carry cool water around with them as they worked. At the couple's feet, the terracotta dog. It was about 3 feet long, its colours, grey and white, still intact. The craftsman who had made it had portrayed it with front legs extended, hind legs folded, mouth half open with the pink tongue hanging out, eyes watchful. Lying down, in short, but on guard. The rug had a few holes through which one could see the sand of the cave floor, but these may well have been already there when the rug was put in the cave. "Everybody out," Montalbano ordered. Then, turning to Prestia and the cameraman, "And turn off those lamps, now." He had suddenly realized how much damage the heat of the floodlights and their own mere presence must be causing. He was left alone in the cave. By the beam of the flashlight, he carefully examined the contents of the bowl. Those round objects were metal coins, oxidized and covered with verdigris. Gently, with 2 fingers, he picked one up, seemingly the best preserved. It was a 20 centesimo piece, minted in 1941, with a portrait of King Victor Emmanuel on one side and a female profile with the Roman fasces on the other. When he aimed the light at the dead man's head, he noticed a hole in the temple. He was too well versed in such matters not to realize that it had been made by a firearm. The man had either committed suicide or been killed. But if it had been a suicide, where was the weapon? The woman's body, on the other hand, bore no trace of violent, induced death. Montalbano remained pensive. The two were naked, yet there was no clothing in the cave. What did it mean? Without growing first yellow and dim, the flashlight suddenly went out. The battery had died. He was momentarily blinded and couldn't get his bearings. To avoid damaging anything, he crouched down on the sand, waiting for his eyes to adjust to the dark. In a minute he would surely start to glimpse the faint glow of the passageway. Yet those few seconds of total darkness and silence were enough for him to notice an unusual odour that he was certain he had smelt before. He tried to remember where, even if it was of no importance. Ever since childhood he had always associated a colour with every smell that caught his attention. This smell, he decided, was dark green. From this association, he was able to remember where he had first noticed it. It was in Cairo, inside the Pyramid of Cheops, in a corridor off-limits to tourists which he had been able to visit courtesy of an Egyptian friend. And all at once he felt like a quaquarakwa, a worthless man with no respect for anything. That morning, by surprising the two kids making love, he had desecrated life. And now, by exposing the two bodies that should have remained forever unknown to the world in their embrace, he had desecrated death. Perhaps because of this feeling of guilt, Montalbano did not wish to take part in the evidence-gathering which Giacomuzzi and his crime lab team, along with Dr. Pasquano, began at once. He had already smoked 5 cigarettes, seated on the boulder that served as a door to the weapons cave, when he heard Pasquano call to him in an agitated, irritated voice. "Where the hell is the judge?" "You're asking me?" "If he doesn't get here soon, things are going to turn nasty. I've got to get these corpses to Montelusa and put them in the fridge. They're practically decomposing before our eyes. What am I supposed to do?" "Have a cigarette with me," Montalbano said, trying to pacify him. Judge Lobianco arrived 15 minutes later, after the inspector had smoked another 2 cigarettes. Lobianco glanced distractedly at the scene, and since the dead were not from the time of King Martin the Younger, said hastily to the coroner, "Do whatever you want with them. It's ancient history in any case." Televigata had immediately discovered the proper angle from which to present the story. The first thing one saw on the evening news at 8:30 was Prestia's excited face announcing an extraordinary scoop for which, he said, they were indebted to one of those ingenious intuitions that make Inspector Salvo Montalbano of Vigata a figure perhaps unique among crime investigators across the island of Sicily and, why not, in all of Italy. He went on to recount the inspector's dramatic arrest of the fugitive Tano the Greek, the bloodthirsty mafia boss, and his discovery of the weapons cache inside the Krasticedru cave. Then they played some footage of the press conference held after Tano's arrest, in which an insane-looking, stammering man, who answered to the name and title of Inspector Montalbano, was having trouble putting together 4 consecutive words. Prestia resumed his account of how this exceptional detective had become convinced that behind the cave of weapons there must be another cave connected to it. "Trusting in the inspector's intuition," said Prestia, "I followed him, assisted by my cameraman, Gerlando Schiriro." At this point, Prestia, adopting a tone of mystery, raised a few questions. What sort of secret paranormal powers did the inspector possess? What was it made him think that an ancient tragedy lay hidden behind a few rocks, blackened by time? Did the inspector have X-ray vision like Superman? Upon hearing this last question, Montalbano, who was watching the broadcast from his home, and for the last half hour had been unsuccessfully searching for a clean pair of underpants, which he knew must be around somewhere, told the newsman to go fuck himself. As the chilling images of the bodies in the cave started rolling, Prestia expounded his thesis with conviction. Since he didn't know about the hole in the man's head, he spoke of 2 people who had died for love. In his opinion, the lovers, their passion opposed by their families, had shut themselves up in the cave, sealing off the passageway and letting themselves starve to death. They had furnished their final refuge with an old rug and a jug full of water, and had waited for death in each other's arms. Of the bowl full of coins, he said nothing. It would have clashed with the scene he was painting. The 2, Prestia went on, had not been identified. Their story had taken place at least 50 years ago. Then another newscaster started talking about the day's events. A 6-year-old girl raped and bludgeoned to death with a stone by a paternal uncle. A corpse discovered in a well. A shootout at Murphy resulting in 3 dead and 4 injured. A labourer killed in an industrial accident. The disappearance of a dentist. The suicide of a businessman who had been squeezed by loan sharks. The arrest of a town councillor in Montevergine for graft and corruption. The suicide of the provincial president, who had been indicted for receiving stolen goods. A dead body washed ashore. Montalbano fell into a deep sleep in front of the television.
Hello, Salvo. JJ here. Let me talk and don't interrupt with your usual bullshit. I need to see you. I need to tell you something.
Okay, JJ. Even tonight's okay if you want.
I'm not in Vigata. I'm in Trapani.
So, when?
What day is today?
Thursday.
How about Saturday midnight at the usual place?
Listen, JJ, Saturday night I'm having dinner with someone, but I can come anyway. If I'm a little late, wait for me. The phone call from JJ, who from his tone of voice sounded worried, enough not to tolerate any joking, had woken him up just in time. It was 10 o'clock, and he tuned into the free channel. Niccolò Zitto, with his intelligent face, red hair, and red ideas, opened the news broadcast with the story of a labourer who died at his workplace in Fela, roasted alive in a gas explosion. He listed a series of examples to demonstrate how, in at least 90% of the cases, management was blithely indifferent to safety standards. He then moved on to the arrest of some public officials charged with various forms of embezzlement, and used this instance to remind viewers of how several different elected governments had tried in vain to pass laws that might prevent the clean-up operation currently underway. His third item was the suicide of the businessman strangled by debts to a loan shark. And here he criticised the government's provisions against usury as utterly inadequate. Why, he asked, were those investigating this scourge so careful to keep loan sharking and the mafia separate? How many different ways were there to launder dirty money? Finally, he came to the news of the 2 bodies found in the cave, but he approached it from a peculiar perspective, indirectly challenging the angle that Prestia and Televigata had taken on the story. Somebody, he said, once asserted that religion is the opium of the people. Today, instead, one would have to say that the real opium is television. For example, why had certain people presented this case as a story of 2 lovers thwarted in their love? What facts authorized anyone to advance such a hypothesis? The 2 were found nude. What had happened to their clothes? No trace of any weapon was found in the cave. How would they have killed themselves? By starving to death? Come on. Why did the man have a bowl beside him containing coins no longer current today, but still valid at the time of their deaths? To pay Charon's toll. The truth, claimed the newsman, is that they want to turn a probable crime into a certain suicide, a romantic suicide. And in our dark days, with so many threatening clouds on the horizon, he concluded, we puff up a story like this to drug people, to distract their attention from the serious problems and divert them with a Romeo and Juliet story, one scripted, however, by a soap opera writer.
Darling, it's Livia. I wanted to tell you I've booked our tickets. The flight leaves from Rome, so you'll have to buy a ticket from Palermo to Fiumicino. I'll do the same from Genoa. We'll meet at the airport and board together. I've also reserved our hotel. A friend of mine has stayed there and said it's really nice, without being too fancy. I think you'll like it. We leave in 2 weeks and a day. I'm so happy. I'm counting the days and the hours. Salvo, what's wrong?
Nothing. Why should there be anything wrong?
You don't sound very enthusiastic.
Of course I am. What do you mean?
Look, Salvo, if you wiggle out of this at the last minute, I'll go anyway, by myself.
Come on.
But what's wrong with you?
Nothing. I was sleeping.
Inspector Montalbano. Good evening. This is Headmaster Burgio.
Good evening. What can I do for you?
I'm very sorry to disturb you at home. I just heard on television about the 2 bodies that were found.
Could you identify them?
No. I'm calling about something that was said in passing on TV, but which might be of interest to you.
I'm talking about the terracotta dog.
If you have no objection, I thought I'd come to your office tomorrow morning with Buruano, the accountant. Do you know him?
I know who he is. 10 o'clock, all right?
Here, said Livia. I want to do it here, right away.
They were in a kind of park, dense with trees. Crawling about at their feet were hundreds of snails of every variety. Garden snails, tree snails, escargots, slugs, periwinkles. Why right here? Let's get back in the car, and in 5 minutes we'll be home. Around here somebody might see us.
Don't argue, jerk,
Livia shot back, grabbing his belt and trying awkwardly to unbuckle it. I'll do it, he said. In an instant, Livia was naked, while he was still struggling with his trousers, then his underpants. She's accustomed to stripping in a hurry, he thought, in a surge of Sicilian jealousy. As Livia threw herself down on the wet grass, legs spread, caressing her breasts with her hands, he heard, to his disgust, the sound of dozens of snails being crushed under the weight of her body.
Come on, hurry up, she said.
Montalbano finally managed to strip down naked, shuddering in the chill air. Meanwhile, a few snails had started slithering over Livia's body.
And what do you expect to do with that?
She asked critically, eyeing his cock. With a look of compassion, she got up on her knees, took it in her hands, caressed it, and put her lips around it. When she felt he was ready, she resumed her prior position.
Fuck me to kingdom come, she said.
When did she become so vulgar, he wondered, bewildered. As he was about to enter her, he saw the dog a few steps away. A white dog with its pink tongue sticking out, growling menacingly, teeth bared, a string of slobber dribbling from its mouth. When did it get there?
What are you doing? Has it gone soft again?
There's a dog.
What the hell do you care? Give it to me.
At that exact moment, the dog sprang into the air, and he froze, terrified. The dog landed a few inches from his head, turned stiff, its colour lightly fading, then lay down, its front legs extended, hind legs folded. It became fake, turned into terracotta. It was the dog in the cave, the one guarding the dead couple. Then all at once, the sky, trees and grass disappeared, walls of rock formed around them and overhead, and in horror he realized that the dead couple in the cave were not two strangers, but Livia and himself. He awoke from the nightmare, breathless and sweating, and immediately in his mind he begged Livia's forgiveness for having imagined her as so obscene in the dream. But what was the meaning of that dog? And those disgusting snails slithering all over the place? That dog had to have a meaning. He was sure of it. Before going to the office, he stopped at a kiosk and bought Sicily's 2 newspapers. Both of them prominently featured the story of the bodies found in the cave. As for the discovery of the weapons, they had prominently forgotten about that. The paper published in Palermo was certain that it had been a love-suicide, whereas the one published in Catania was also open to the possibility of murder, while not, of course, discounting suicide, and indeed its headline read, "Double suicide or dual homicide," implying some vague, mysterious distinction between double and dual. On the other hand, no matter what the issue, this newspaper customarily never took a position. Whether the subject was a war or an earthquake, it always liked to play both sides of the fence, and for this had gained a reputation as an independent, free-thinking daily. Neither of the two dwelt on the jug, the bowl, or the terracotta dog. The instant Montalbano appeared in the doorway, Cattarella asked him what he should say to the hundreds of journalists who were certain to phone, wanting to speak with the inspector. "Tell them I've gone on a mission."
"What? You've become a missionary?"
quipped the policeman, lightning quick, chuckling noisily to himself. Montalbano concluded that he'd been right the previous evening to unplug the telephone before going to bed.
This is the end of CD 3. The book continues on CD 4.